The Mandarin insult cut through the restaurant's elegant quiet like a blade. Vanessa Whitmore didn't expect a response, certainly not in flawless Mandarin, delivered with the calm precision that only comes from genuine mastery. The waiter who just shattered her assumptions wasn't supposed to exist in her carefully controlled world. But Ethan Cole had spent 6 years perfecting invisibility, and tonight, that carefully constructed armor cracked wide open. One language, one moment, everything about to change. If you want to see how a single conversation can completely rewrite 2 lives, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The November rain hammered Michigan Avenue with the kind of relentless Chicago cold that made even luxury feel temporary. Inside Oralee, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, the warmth held a different quality. Manufactured, expensive, the kind that reminded you money could buy comfort, but not necessarily peace. Ethan Cole moved through Table 7's setup with practiced efficiency, aligning silverware with the precision of someone who'd learned that perfection was the best camouflage. Thursday nights at Oralee meant power dinners, corporate deals sealed over $30 appetizers, conversations where millions changed hands between the bread course and dessert. He'd worked here for 4 years now, long enough that the other servers barely noticed him anymore. Long enough that he'd perfected the art of being present without being seen. His reflection caught briefly in the polished wine glass he positioned. 32 years old, dark hair always neat, navy vest and white shirt pressed until the creases could cut. Nothing remarkable. Nothing memorable. Exactly how he needed it. Ethan. Marcus, the floor manager, appeared at his elbow with that particular expression that meant complications. Last-minute VIP in your section. 20 minutes. Ethan nodded, already mentally recalculating his evening. Sophie's bedtime was 8:30. Mrs. Chen next door had agreed to watch her until 10, but every minute past that cost extra, and extra wasn't something his bank account handled well. Name? He asked, already knowing it wouldn't matter. They were all the same at this altitude. Executives who treated service staff like furniture that occasionally brought food. Whitmore, but Vanessa Whitmore, say. Marcus said it like the name should trigger recognition. When Ethan's expression remained neutral, Marcus added, Whitmore Industries? Jesus, Ethan, don't you read the business section? Oh. Can't afford the subscription, Ethan said mildly, which was both true and a lie. He could afford a lot of things if he wanted them. Languages came free from libraries and YouTube, though, and those had proven infinitely more valuable than knowing which billionaire was feuding with which hedge fund. 20 minutes later, Vanessa Whitmore walked through Oralee's entrance like she was personally offended by the restaurant's existence. Ethan noticed her the way he noticed everything, peripherally, filing details without staring. Late 20s, maybe 30, charcoal suit that probably cost more than his monthly rent, cut with aggressive precision. Dark hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful. She moved past the hostess stand without stopping, clearly expected, and the entire front-of-house staff shifted their posture unconsciously, like plants tracking sunlight. Or maybe tracking a storm. She dropped into the chair at table 7 with the kind of controlled violence that suggested she'd rather be throwing it. Ethan approached with water and menus, his face arranged in the neutral pleasantness that 4 years had perfected. Good evening, Ms. Whitmore. Welcome to Oralee. Can I start you with, scotch? Neat. The Macallan, if you have it. Her eyes never left her phone. And tell me your specials without making them sound special. I don't have patience for performance tonight. Ethan recited the evening's menu with clinical efficiency, watching her facial expression for the micro-reactions that would tell him what she actually wanted to eat. It was a skill he'd developed early, reading people through the small things they didn't know they were revealing. She'd order the salmon, medium rare, despite the menu's recommendation. No sauce. The salmon, she said, confirming his prediction. Medium rare, no sauce. Excellent choice, Ek. He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. Not English this time. 终于，一个不会对我废话的服务员，可惜他可能听不懂这句话。The Mandarin flowed naturally, conversational, with Beijing's particular accent softening the consonants. Finally, a waiter who doesn't waste my time with small talk. Too bad he probably can't understand this. Ethan's hand tightened imperceptibly on his notepad. 4 years of carefully maintained invisibility pressed against 6 years of linguistic muscle memory. Sophie's face flashed through his mind, that serious expression she got when doing homework at their tiny kitchen table. How she'd asked him last week why he never spoke the other languages anymore. Because speaking them makes you visible, sweetheart. And visible isn't safe. But something about the casual cruelty in Vanessa Whitmore's assumption cracked something in his chest. The assumption that he was simple, decorative, background noise in her important life. 很高兴我能达到你的期望, he replied, his Mandarin carrying the same Beijing accent. I'm glad I could meet your expectations. Vanessa's head snapped up so fast her phone clattered against the table. The look on her face wasn't anger, not yet. It was something rawer than that, shock maybe, or the particular disorientation of someone who'd just had their fundamental assumptions about the world violently rearranged. You speak Mandarin? Her English came back clipped, controlled, but something underneath it had shifted. Among other things, Ethan said, reverting to English himself, keeping his tone professionally neutral even as his heart hammered. I'll put your order in. The scotch will be right out. He walked away before she could respond, before the conversation could extend into territory he couldn't afford to navigate. Marcus gave him a questioning look from across the dining room, probably picking up on the tension, but Ethan just shook his head slightly and moved to the bar. His hands were steadier than they should have been as he relayed the drink order. 4 years of invisibility, 6 years before that of survival. All of it built on the foundation of making himself small, unremarkable, safe. And he just cracked that foundation because a billionaire assumed he was stupid. Stupid, he thought bitterly, pulling Sophie's school photo from his wallet while he waited for the scotch. No, Sophie. Just tired. When he returned with her drink, Vanessa was studying him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. How many? She asked without preamble. I'm sorry? Languages. How many do you speak? Ethan set down the scotch with careful precision. Is there anything else I can get you, Ms. Whitmore? Answer the question. 7 fluently, he said, because apparently tonight was the night for demolishing carefully constructed defenses. 3 more conversationally. Something flickered across her face. Interest, maybe, or calculation. And you work here? Yes. Why? Because Sophie needs stability. Because her mother left when she was 6 months old and family court isn't kind to fathers without traditional careers. Because speaking 7 languages doesn't pay rent when you're raising a daughter alone, and every job that would use those skills requires degrees I never had time to finish or references from a life I had to leave behind. The tips are good, he said instead. Vanessa leaned back, still studying him like he was a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. What's your name? Ethan Cole. Well, Ethan Cole. She lifted her scotch in a mock toast. You've just become the most interesting person I've met in 6 months, which says more about my life than I'd like to admit. She dismissed him then, returning to her phone, but Ethan could feel the shift in the air. Something had changed. He'd been noticed. And being noticed was exactly what he'd spent years trying to avoid. The rest of her meal passed in relative silence. She ate the salmon without comment, declined dessert, and left a tip that was generous without being excessive. Professional, appropriate, forgettable. Except when she stood to leave, she paused beside his station. I'll be back Tuesday, she said. Same table? It wasn't a question. Sophie was already asleep when Ethan got home at 11:15, 15 minutes past Mrs. Chen's preferred deadline. He paid her the extra, added an apology, and locked the door behind her with the 3 separate deadbolts their rundown Logan Square apartment required. Their place was small, 1 bedroom that Sophie got, a pull-out couch in the living room for him, a kitchen where the tiles had probably been installed sometime during the Carter administration. But it was theirs, and it was safe. And after Sophie's first year when they'd bounced between shelters and friends' couches, safe mattered more than comfortable. He checked on her automatically, a habit so ingrained he'd probably do it in his sleep. She was sprawled across her twin bed, one arm hanging off the edge, her favorite stuffed elephant clutched against her chest. The nightlight he'd installed, a little turtle that projected stars across the ceiling, cast soft green patterns across her serious 6-year-old face. She looked like her mother. Same sharp chin, same dark eyes that always seemed to be calculating something. But where Amanda had used those features to manipulate and charm, Sophie wielded them with straightforward honesty that occasionally terrified him. She saw too much, understood too much, asked questions that required answers he didn't always know how to give. Last week, "Dad, why do you sound different when you talk to the Korean lady at the grocery store?" That's because I speak Korean, sweetheart. But you never talk Korean to me. Because I don't want you to feel different than the other kids. She'd looked at him with those two old eyes and said, "I already feel different. My mom left. That's pretty different." 6 years old. 6 years of trying to give her stability, normalcy, a childhood that didn't taste like survival. And she already knew the truth he'd been trying to hide, that they were different, that their life was built on careful omissions and managed expectations. Ethan pulled her blanket up, tucked Elephant in closer, and retreated to the living room. The couch opened with its familiar squeak. He'd learned to work around the broken spring on the left side, how to position his pillow so the bar didn't dig into his spine. Small adaptations. Daily negotiations with discomfort, the arithmetic of getting by. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "What the hell happened with Whitmore?" "Nothing," he typed back. Then, because Marcus would push, "She speaks Mandarin." I responded, "No drama." The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "She called the owner personally to request you Tuesday. Whatever you did, do it again. She tips like she's trying to solve poverty." Ethan stared at the message until the screen went dark. Request him, specifically, which meant visible, which meant dangerous. But also, and he hated himself a little for thinking it, which meant money. The kind of tips that could fix the transmission in his car that was currently held together by hope and duct tape. That could pay for Sophie's class field trip to the planetarium without him having to decide between that and the electric bill. He set an alarm for 6 a.m. Sophie needed breakfast before school, and he had 3 hours of online translation work to finish before his lunch shift, and closed his eyes against the star projection from Sophie's room. Tuesday, Vanessa Whitmore had said. He had 4 days to decide whether being visible was worth the risk. Tuesday came faster than it should have. Vanessa arrived at 7:30, earlier than her previous visit, and she wasn't alone. 2 executives in expensive suits flanked her, both men, both carrying the particular swagger that came from never being told no. Ethan approached with menus and the same professional neutrality he'd perfected. "Miss Whitmore, gentlemen, welcome back to Orally, Fog." "Ethan." Vanessa's greeting carried a strange weight, like his name was a test. "These are associates from Whitmore Industries. They don't believe you actually speak 7 languages fluently." The 2 men smirked. The older one, silver-haired, expensive watch, leaned back in his chair. "No offense, son, but 7 languages? That's neurologist territory. No waiter speaks 7 languages." "David thinks you were faking," Vanessa said, her eyes locked on Ethan's face. "He thinks you memorized 1 phrase to impress me. I told him he was wrong." "Was I wrong, Ethan?" It was a trap. He could see it clearly, some kind of corporate power play, Vanessa using him to prove a point to these men who clearly doubted her judgment. Smart money said, walk away. Say he'd exaggerated. Retreat back into invisibility. But Sophie's field trip form was sitting on their kitchen counter, unsigned, because $40 might as well be $400 when your transmission was dying and winter was coming and heating bills in Chicago didn't care about your dignity. "What would you like me to prove?" he asked quietly. The older man, David, pulled out his phone. "I've got a client in Sao Paulo I've been trying to close for 3 months. Portuguese. Technical language. If you can translate this email well enough that it doesn't sound like garbage, I'll believe Vanessa's not losing her judgment." He handed over the phone. Ethan scanned the email quickly. Contract language, nothing too complex, but filled with the kind of business-specific terminology that would trip up a casual speaker. He read it back in Portuguese, adjusting the formality level to match Brazilian business culture, softening the demands that would read as aggressive in Sao Paulo's more relationship-focused business environment. When he finished, he handed back the phone. David stared at him, then at Vanessa, then back at him. "What the hell are you doing serving tables?" "Paying rent," Ethan said simply. The younger executive, Brad, according to his too loud introduction, wasn't convinced. "Okay, so you speak Portuguese. Try Russian." Vanessa's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. You're enjoying this? Absolutely, Brad said. He pulled up something on his own phone, handed it over. Technical manual. Russian to English. 20 minutes later, they'd run him through German, French, Japanese, and Arabic. Each time, the two executives looked more bewildered. Each time, Vanessa looked more satisfied. Finally, David sat back, shaking his head. This is insane, Vanessa. We could use him in international contracts tomorrow. The amount we pay interpreters alone. He's not interested, Vanessa cut in, her eyes still on Ethan. Are you Ethan? Well, I have a daughter, Ethan said. I need stability, not corporate contract work that could disappear in the next restructuring. Smart, David admitted grudgingly, but wasted here. They ordered. Ethan served them through 3 courses, aware of the periodic glances, the whispered conversations he wasn't supposed to hear. As he cleared their dessert plates, Vanessa stopped him with a light touch on his wrist. Thursday, she said. 7 p.m. Same table, just me. I'll be here. I know. She released his wrist. That's why I asked. Thursday, Vanessa arrived exactly at 7, and this time she was visibly exhausted. She ordered wine instead of scotch, and when Ethan brought it, she gestured to the empty chair across from her. Sit. Ms. Whitmore, I can't. It's slow tonight. Marcus already approved it. Sit. Ethan sat, uncomfortable in a way that had nothing to do with breaking protocol. Vanessa studied him over her wine glass. Tell me something true. I'm sorry? Everyone I meet wanted something. They lie, they perform, they calculate. You translate emails for men who insult you and then go back to serving bread. So tell me something true. Why do you really work here? I told you, the tips are good. That's not truth. That's deflection. She leaned forward. Try again. Ethan felt something shift in his chest. Maybe it was exhaustion. He'd been up until 2 a.m. finishing translation work after Sophie's bedtime. Maybe it was the way Vanessa looked genuinely interested, not calculating. Maybe he was just tired of hiding. My daughter's mother left when Sophie was 6 months old, he said quietly. No note, no explanation, just gone. I had no degree, no traditional career, and sole custody of an infant. Every job that could use my languages required references, stability, credentials I didn't have. Serving pays cash, offers flexibility, and doesn't ask questions about gaps in my resume. So I serve. Vanessa was quiet for a long moment. How old is Sophie now? 6. Yeah, 6 years. You've been doing this for 6 years? 7, counting the pregnancy. He smiled without humor. Turns out my ex wasn't great with emotional permanence. Apparently neither was I, for choosing her. What did you do before? I taught English in Taiwan for 2 years, worked translation gigs in Seoul, moved around a lot, met Amanda at a hostel in Bangkok, thought I'd found someone who understood wandering. Turned out she just understood leaving. And the languages? Self-taught, mostly, libraries, YouTube, native speakers willing to practice with a persistent American. He shrugged. Turns out I'm good at patterns. Languages are just patterns with cultural context. Vanessa took a long sip of her wine. I inherited Whitmore Industries when I was 24, she said abruptly. My father died, my mother couldn't handle it, and suddenly I was running a company I barely understood. I've spent 6 years terrified someone will realize I'm faking competence. Every decision, every meeting, every negotiation, I'm constantly calculating how to look like I belong in rooms I was never supposed to occupy. Ethan blinked, surprised by the confession. Ethan blinked, surprised by. So here's something true, Vanessa continued. I come here because for 3 hours I can eat alone and nobody asked me to be impressive. And then last week you spoke Mandarin, and suddenly you were the most real thing I'd encountered in months. Someone actually talented, actually skilled, trapped in a life that doesn't fit. I recognized it immediately. I'm not trapped, Ethan said automatically. Aren't you? The question sat between them, uncomfortable and accurate. Before Ethan could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced down. Mrs. Chen. Never good. I'm sorry, he said, standing. I need to take this. Vanessa waved him away, understanding in her expression. He stepped into the kitchen corridor, answered, Mrs. Chen? Ethan, Sophie has fever, 101. She's saying her throat hurts. His heart dropped. I'm coming home, 15 minutes. He hung up, mind already racing. Marcus would understand, but leaving mid-shift meant lost tips, meant tomorrow's shift in jeopardy. But Sophie with a fever meant urgent care, meant medication, meant... Go! Vanessa was standing in the corridor entrance. Your daughter needs you. I can't just... I'll handle Marcus. Go. Ethan grabbed his coat, already moving, but Vanessa's voice stopped him at the door. Ethan, what's your number? He rattled it off without thinking, too worried about Sophie to question why a billionaire needed his phone number. He made it home in 12 minutes, possibly breaking several traffic laws. Sophie was curled on the couch, Mrs. Chen hovering anxiously. Her face was flushed, her breathing shallow. Hey, sweetheart. He pressed his hand to her forehead, definitely fever. Throat hurts? It's scratchy, she whispered, and my head hurts. Okay, we're going to go see the doctor, all right? The urgent care visit took 3 hours. Strep throat, antibiotics, instructions to keep her home from school for at least 2 days. By the time they got back to the apartment, it was past midnight, and Sophie was asleep against his shoulder. He tucked her into bed, set up the humidifier, and was laying out the antibiotic schedule when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Is she all right? Vanessa. Somehow he knew before checking. Strep throat. She'll be fine. Thank you for tonight. The response came immediately. Take tomorrow off. Marcus understands. I can't afford to miss a shift. 3 dots. Then, yes, you can. I'm covering it. Consider it payment for the translation entertainment. I can't accept that. You already did. Your daughter has strep. Take care of her. We'll talk when she's better. Ethan stared at the message for a long time. Part of him wanted to be angry, charity from a billionaire who didn't understand what survival actually cost. But another part, the part that was bone-tired and worried and so damn lonely, just felt grateful. Thank you, he typed. Don't mention it, literally. I have a reputation for being heartless. It's very carefully cultivated. Despite everything, he smiled. Sophie recovered over the next 3 days. Ethan worked his shifts, avoiding Vanessa's table on the one night she came in, though he felt her watching him from across the dining room. The following Tuesday, she was back at table 7. Your daughter, she said when he approached. Is she better? Much better. Thank you again for... I have a proposition. Vanessa cut him off, businesslike. My primary interpreter is taking maternity leave. 6 weeks. I have 3 international negotiations scheduled. Portuguese, Mandarin, and German. I'll pay you $5,000 per negotiation, $15,000 total. Ethan's mind went blank. $15,000. Sophie's college fund. New transmission. Rent for 3 months. Why? He managed. Because you're talented. Because I saw you handle David's email in 30 seconds and make it sound like poetry. Because I'm tired of mediocre interpreters who make me look incompetent. She paused. And because I think you deserve a chance to stop hiding. I can't just leave the restaurant for 6 weeks. I already spoke to Marcus. He'll hold your position. This is freelance, Ethan. One negotiation at a time. If you hate it, you walk away. And if I fail, then you fail. But at least you'll fail doing something that actually uses what you're capable of. Ethan thought of Sophie, her serious little face asking why he never spoke the other languages anymore. Thought of 7 years of invisibility, of shrinking himself to fit inside other people's assumptions. Thought of his mother. He rarely let himself go there, but now the memory surfaced. His mother telling him once, before she died, that she wished she'd been braver. When's the first negotiation? He asked. Vanessa's smile was small but genuine. Friday. I'll have a suit sent over tomorrow. You're not walking into a boardroom dressed like a waiter. I don't need... Yes, she interrupted. You do. Trust me on this one. First impressions in my world are everything. The suit arrived Thursday afternoon, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, with a shirt and tie that probably cost more than his monthly rent. A note was pinned inside. Don't argue. Wear it. Friday morning, Sophie watched him dress with wide eyes. "You look fancy," she said seriously. "I feel fancy," he admitted, also terrified. "Why?" "Because I'm doing something new today, something I haven't done in a long time." Sophie considered this. "Is it because of the lady from your restaurant?" "How do you know about her?" "Mrs. Chen said a fancy lady covered your shift when I was sick. She said the lady must really like you." Ethan crouched down to Sophie's level. "It's not like that. Sweetheart, she's giving me a chance to use my languages for real work, for important work. Will you make more money?" The question, so practical from such a small person, made his chest tight. "Yeah, I will." "Good." Sophie hugged him fiercely. "You should make more money. You're really smart." He held her longer than necessary, breathing in the Johnson's baby shampoo smell of her hair, the simple certainty of 6-year-old faith. "I love you, Sophie Cole." "Love you too, Dad. Don't mess up." He laughed despite his nerves. "I'll try my best." The Whitmore Industries building was downtown, all glass and steel and aggressive corporate minimalism. Ethan walked through the lobby feeling simultaneously overdressed and completely out of place. The security guard directed him to the 42nd floor, Executive Conference Room B. Vanessa met him outside the elevator, looking every inch the billionaire CEO in a navy suit that probably cost more than his car. "You clean up well," she said. "I feel like I'm wearing someone else's skin." "Sin. Good. That's what confidence looks like before you own it." She gestured down the hallway. "The Sao Paulo group is already here. David's been trying to close this deal for 4 months. They keep stalling, keep finding excuses. I think it's a culture gap. David's too aggressive for Brazilian business style. You're going to bridge that gap." "No pressure," Ethan muttered. "Enormous pressure," Vanessa corrected. "But I've seen you handle it. You translated that email in 30 seconds and made David look competent. Now do it in real time for 3 hours." The conference room held 6 people, David and 2 other Whitmore associates, and 3 executives from Brazil. Introductions were made in English, polite and professional, but Ethan could see the slight stiffness in the Brazilian delegation's posture, the careful way they chose their words. They were uncomfortable, out of their element, exactly how he'd felt walking into this building an hour ago. When the negotiation began, Ethan didn't just translate. He adapted, softened David's aggressive demands into collaborative proposals, adjusted the formality level to match Brazilian business culture, added cultural context that helped both sides understand the gaps in their communication. An hour in, the senior Brazilian executive, Carlos, looked at him directly for the first time. "Você realmente entende como fazemos negócios?" he said in Portuguese. "You actually understand how we do business." "Passei tempo em São Paulo," Ethan replied. "I spent time in São Paulo," which was technically true, though time meant 2 weeks and a lot of library research. "Respeito é mais importante que velocidade." Respect is more important than speed. Carlos smiled, actually smiled, and something shifted in the room. By hour 3, they had a deal. Not just an agreement, but a genuine partnership built on mutual respect and understanding. David looked stunned. The other Whitmore associates kept glancing at Ethan like he'd performed actual magic. Vanessa walked him out personally when it was over. "That was remarkable," she said quietly. "That was expensive," Ethan countered. $5,000 for 3 hours of work is insane. That was $15 million in secured contracts because you understood that business is about people, not just terms. She stopped at the elevator. Friday was worth every penny. And Ethan, you weren't translating in there. You were conducting. That's different. That's rare. The elevator doors opened. Ethan stepped in, then turned back. "Thank you," he said, "for seeing something I forgot I had." "Thank yourself," Vanessa replied. "I just provided the venue. You remembered how to speak." The doors closed, and Ethan rode down 42 floors feeling like he was rising instead of falling. His phone buzzed. "Sophie, via Mrs. Chen's phone. Did you mess up?" He smiled. "Not even a little bit, sweetheart." "I knew it. Mrs. Chen says I can have ice cream to celebrate your important job, Mrs." Chen is right. Ice cream for everyone. That night, he took Sophie to their neighborhood ice cream place, a tiny spot with checkered floors and prices that didn't require a small loan. She got chocolate with rainbow sprinkles. He got coffee, black, because some habits were too ingrained to break. Tell me about the fancy job, Sophie demanded around a mouthful of chocolate. So he did. Simplified it. Made it a story about helping people understand each other, but kept the core truth. He'd used his languages, really used them, and it had mattered. Sophie listened with that serious expression she got when processing something important. Are you going to do it again? She asked finally. I think so. If they ask me. Good. She returned to her ice cream. You smile different when you talk about languages. Like you're happy, but also sad. Why? 6 years old, and she saw straight through him. Because languages remind me of who I used to be, he said honestly, before I became your dad. But you're still you, Sophie pointed out with 6-year-old logic. You didn't stop being you. You just got more important stuff to do. Like taking care of me. Ethan felt something crack open in his chest. Not breaking, but opening. Like a door he'd kept locked was suddenly remembering how to swing free. You're pretty smart, you know that? Sophie grinned, rainbow sprinkles decorating her teeth. Mrs. Chen says I get it from you. Mrs. Chen is very wise. They finished their ice cream as the November evening settled around Chicago, cold and clear. Walking home, Sophie's small hand in his, Ethan thought about Vanessa's words. You weren't translating, you were conducting. Maybe she was right. Maybe he'd been conducting his whole life, orchestrating survival, arranging safety, composing stability out of chaos, and just never recognized it as a skill worth claiming. His phone buzzed again. Vanessa. Mandarin negotiation is in 2 weeks. Same rate. Are you interested? Sophie was chattering about something that happened at school, oblivious to the decision hanging in his pocket. Ethan looked down at his daughter, 6 years old, rainbow sprinkles, absolute certainty that her dad was smart, and typed back, yes. Send me the details. The response came immediately. Already done. You're on the calendar. Don't mess this one up. He smiled. No promises. Good. Promises are boring. Competence is interesting. They walked the rest of the way home in comfortable silence, Sophie's hand warm in his, the Chicago skyline glittering in the distance like a promise he was finally ready to consider keeping. The Mandarin negotiation arrived on a Wednesday that started with Sophie throwing up in the bathroom at 5:30 in the morning. Ethan held her hair back, one hand on her small shoulders, mentally recalculating his entire day. The negotiation was at 9. Non-negotiable, Vanessa had said. The Hong Kong delegation had flown in specifically for this meeting, and Whitmore Industries stood to gain or lose $23 million, depending on how the next 4 hours went. I'm sorry, Dad, Sophie whispered miserably. Hey, no, this isn't your fault. He got her situated on the couch with a bucket, ginger ale, and her tablet cued to her favorite shows. Mrs. Chen arrived by 6:15, took one look at Sophie's pale face, and waved Ethan toward the door. Go! I handled this before, she'll be fine. If she gets worse, I call you immediately. Now go before you're late for important fancy job. Ethan made it downtown by 8:40, which gave him exactly enough time to panic in the building's bathroom about whether he remembered enough. Mandarin business terminology to not humiliate himself in front of executives who'd flown 7,000 miles. Vanessa found him splashing water on his face. You look terrible, she observed. Sophie's sick. I've had about 3 hours of sleep, and I'm about to negotiate $23 million worth of contracts in a language I mostly learned from YouTube videos. So, typical Wednesday. Vanessa handed him a coffee. Drink this. And Ethan, you handled the Portuguese negotiation like you'd been doing it for 20 years. The Hong Kong team is no different. They're just people trying to make a deal that works for everyone. People who will immediately recognize if I'm faking competence. Good thing you're not faking, then. She checked her watch. 5 minutes. Conference room A. Don't overthink it. The Hong Kong delegation consisted of 4 executives, all impeccably dressed, all carrying themselves with the particular confidence that came from representing serious money. The lead negotiator, A woman named Margaret Chen greeted Vanessa in English, then switched immediately to Mandarin when she saw Ethan. Nisha Fanima, are you the interpreter? Shida fa, Ethan replied, keeping his tone respectful. Henrong Singneng Wei Nin Fu Wu. Yes, it's an honor to serve you. Margaret's eyebrow lifted slightly. Approval, maybe, or just acknowledgement that his accent was better than she'd expected. 美国人说普通话说得这么好的不多见. It's rare to meet an American who speaks Mandarin this well. 我有很好的老师, Ethan said. I had good teachers, which was technically true if you counted YouTube polyglots and patient strangers in Chicago's Chinatown who tolerated his terrible tones for years. The negotiation began cordially enough, but within 30 minutes, Ethan could feel the undercurrents. Margaret's team wasn't just negotiating terms. They were testing Whitmore Industries' cultural understanding. Every question carried layers. Every pause meant something. David, leading the Whitmore side again, pushed too hard on exclusivity terms. Ethan softened the language, but Margaret caught the gap between what David said and what Ethan translated. Fan yi bu go jun kue, she said coolly. The translation isn't quite accurate. Ethan's stomach dropped. Getting caught softening translations was a rookie mistake, the kind of thing that destroyed credibility instantly. But Vanessa leaned forward, switching to Mandarin herself. 翻译很准确，他理解文化差异，这正是我们需要的. The translation is accurate. He understands cultural differences, which is exactly what we need. Margaret studied Vanessa for a long moment, then turned back to Ethan. Jishu, she said. Continue. The next 3 hours were the most intellectually demanding work Ethan had done in 7 years. It wasn't just translation. It was cultural navigation, emotional intelligence, reading the room's energy and adjusting his language to match shifting dynamics. When David got frustrated, Ethan found ways to reframe his positions as collaborative rather than demanding. When Margaret's team pushed back on timeline terms, Ethan helped articulate concerns that David hadn't even recognized existed. By noon, they had a preliminary agreement. Not final, that would require lawyers and weeks of documentation, but a genuine foundation built on actual understanding rather than just translated words. Margaret stood, extended her hand to Ethan first, not Vanessa. 你应该考虑更大的职业发展, she said. You should consider bigger career opportunities. 我正在考虑, Ethan replied honestly. I'm considering it. After the Hong Kong team left, David cornered Ethan in the hallway. That thing you did in there, where you made me sound less like an asshole without changing what I actually meant. Can you teach me that? It's not really teachable, Ethan said. It's about reading what people aren't saying, which is a skill worth a hell of a lot more than $5,000 per negotiation. David glanced back toward the conference room. I'm serious, Cole. If you ever want to stop being a waiter pretending to be a consultant, Vanessa's got my vote for hiring you permanently. You're a mess. Ethan's phone buzzed before he could respond. Mrs. Chen. Sophie fever, 102. Should I worry? I have to go, he said to David, already moving toward the elevator. Vanessa caught him at the doors. Your daughter? Fever. I need to go. We'll handle the rest. She paused. The German negotiation is Friday. Can you make it? 9. Ethan thought about $15,000. Thought about Sophie's fever, Mrs. Chen's worried text, the constant arithmetic of managing someone else's childhood, while your own life stayed frozen. I'll make it work, he said. The elevator doors closed on Vanessa's expression, something between concern and calculation, like she was trying to solve an equation that didn't have enough variables yet. Sophie's fever broke by evening, but she stayed home from school Thursday and Friday, which meant Ethan worked the German negotiation running on caffeine and parental anxiety. The negotiation itself went smoothly. German business culture was more straightforward than Mandarin, less about reading subtext, but Ethan kept checking his phone between sessions, waiting for Mrs. Chen to text that Sophie had gotten worse. The text came at 3 p.m. She asking for you, not emergency, just missing dad. Ethan excused himself, called home, and spent 5 minutes listening to Sophie describe her day in minute detail. What she'd eaten, what show she'd watched, whether Mrs. Chen's cat was nicer than their neighbor's dog. Normal 6-year-old concerns. The sound of her voice, steady and healthy, unknotted something in his chest he hadn't realized was twisted. When he returned to the conference room, Vanessa was waiting in the hallway. Everything okay? She's fine, just wanted to talk. What? Oh. You're good at this, Vanessa said abruptly. At what? Mediocre parenting while juggling corporate negotiations? At balancing impossible things without dropping them. She tilted her head slightly. Most people can't do that. They either sacrifice everything for their career or sacrifice their career for everything else. You're holding both. Barely. Still holding. Vanessa checked her phone. The German team wants to continue Monday. Same rate. But I have a different proposition. I'm listening. Come to the Whitmore Christmas Gala. Next Saturday. Black tie. Bring Sophie if you need to. We're setting up a kids' room with activities. Every major client will be there. And half of them need interpreters they can actually trust. Think of it as networking, except you'll get paid for conversations. Ethan laughed despite himself. You want me to work a party? I want you to show up as yourself instead of hiding behind a waiter's uniform. There's a difference. I don't own a tuxedo. I'll send one. Say yes before you think of more excuses. Vanessa. Saturday, 7 p.m., the Drake Hotel. I'll have your name at the door. She started back toward the conference room, then paused. And Ethan, bring Sophie. I'd like to meet the person you're doing all this for. The gala invitation sat in Ethan's mind all week like a question he didn't know how to answer. Saturday arrived cold and clear, the kind of December evening where Chicago's skyline looked sharp enough to cut. Sophie watched him dress with her serious expression firmly in place. You look like a movie person, she announced. I feel ridiculous. Mrs. Chen says fancy parties are where important people make important decisions while pretending to have fun. Mrs. Chen is disturbingly perceptive. Ethan adjusted his bow tie for the third time. You sure you want to come? You could stay with Mrs. Chen instead. Are there going to be other kids there? Vanessa said they were setting up a kids' room with activities. Then I want to come. I want to see the fancy lady who gave you the fancy job. The Drake Hotel was exactly as intimidating as Ethan expected. All marble and gold trim and doormen who looked like they could bench press luxury cars. Sophie gripped his hand tighter as they walked through the entrance. Dad, everyone looks important. Yes, sweetheart, they do. What's the ballroom was overwhelming. Crystal chandeliers, tables set with enough silverware to confuse a royal family, and about 200 people who all looked like they'd been born wearing tuxedos. Ethan immediately regretted coming. Then Vanessa appeared through the crowd, and his breath caught slightly. She'd traded her usual corporate armor for a deep green dress that managed to look both elegant and dangerous. Her hair was down for the first time since he'd met her, and the effect was disorienting, like seeing someone remove a mask you hadn't realized they were wearing. You made it, she said, then looked down at Sophie. And you must be the famous Sophie Cole. Sophie straightened up, suddenly formal. Nice to meet you, Ms. Whitmore. Thank you for helping my dad. Your dad helped himself. I just provided opportunities. Vanessa crouched slightly to Sophie's level. The kids' room has a professional face painter and apparently unlimited hot chocolate. Want me to show you? Sophie looked at Ethan for permission. He nodded, and Vanessa led them through the ballroom to a side room where about 15 children were engaged in various crafts under the supervision of several very patient-looking staff members. Dad, they have origami, Sophie breathed, already gravitating toward a table covered in colorful paper. I'll come check on you in an hour, Ethan promised. Make it 2 hours, Vanessa corrected. You've got work to do. She guided him back to the ballroom, snagged 2 glasses of champagne from a passing waiter, and handed him one. Drink. You look like you're about to bolt. I'm calculating how many of these people could buy my entire life with their watch budget. Most of them. Don't think about it. Vanessa gestured toward a cluster of executives near the far wall. That's the Singapore delegation I told you about. They've been stalling on a tech partnership for 8 months because our last interpreter kept mangling the cultural nuances. I need you to fix that. Now? At a party? Especially at a party. This is where real deals happen, Ethan. The conference rooms are just theater. She steered him toward the group. Be yourself. Be brilliant. Make me look smart for hiring you. The Singapore executives were mid-conversation when Vanessa interrupted with practiced ease. Gentlemen, I want you to meet Ethan Cole, our new cultural liaison. Ethan, this is Thomas Lim and his team from Singapore Tech Solutions. Thomas turned, polite but clearly unimpressed by another corporate introduction. Then Ethan spoke. Henrong Sing Jiandao Nin, he said in Mandarin, then switched immediately to English. Whitmore mentioned you've had concerns about our previous communication strategies. I'd love to hear your perspective. Thomas blinked, surprise flickering across his face. 你的中文说得很好, he said. Your Mandarin is very good. 谢谢. 我努力学习了很多年. Thank you. I've worked hard at it for many years. What followed was less negotiation and more genuine conversation about Singapore's tech sector, about cultural differences in business communication, about Thomas's concerns that Whitmore Industries didn't actually understand Asian markets beyond superficial research. Ethan didn't push, didn't sell. He just listened, asked questions, and responded in a way that demonstrated actual understanding rather than scripted talking points. 40 minutes later, Thomas shook his hand warmly. You should come to Singapore, see our operations yourself. Maybe then Whitmore's proposals would actually make sense. I'd like that, Ethan said honestly. After Thomas's group moved on, Vanessa reappeared at his elbow. What did you just do? Had a conversation. You got him to invite you to Singapore. David's been trying to get that invitation for a year. She studied him with that calculating expression he was starting to recognize. You're good at this in a way that's going to make my other consultants look incompetent. I'm just talking to people. You're making them feel understood. That's completely different. She clinked her champagne glass against his. 3 more groups need exactly what you just did. Can you handle it? Ethan glanced towards the kids' room, visible through the ballroom's glass doors. Sophie was deep in concentration over some origami creation, her tongue sticking out slightly the way it did when she was focused. Yeah, he said, I can handle it. The next 2 hours blurred together, conversations in Mandarin, German, Portuguese, switching between languages so frequently his brain started to ache. But it was good ache, the kind that came from actually using skills that had been dormant for years. Every executive he spoke with seemed surprised, then impressed, then genuinely engaged in ways that formal conference rooms never achieved. Around 9:30, Ethan excused himself to check on Sophie. He found her sitting at a table covered in origami creatures, deep in conversation with another little girl about whether dragons or unicorns were scientifically more plausible. Dad! Sophie jumped up when she saw him. This is Maya, and she thinks dragons could breathe fire because of methane, but I told her unicorns make more sense because horses are real and horns are real, so you just combine them. Both compelling arguments, Ethan said seriously. Are you done with the important talking? Not quite yet. You okay here for a bit longer? Yeah, we're making a zoo. She gestured at the impressive collection of paper animals covering their table. Can I keep them? Absolutely. He returned to the ballroom to find Vanessa cornered by an older man who radiated the particular aggression of someone used to getting his way through volume and intimidation. She looked exhausted. Completely unacceptable timeline, the man was saying loudly. I've been waiting 3 months for your team to... Ethan stepped in smoothly. Excuse me, Mr. Harrison, Robert Harrison. He turned his aggressive energy toward Ethan. And you are? You're... Ethan Cole, Cultural Liaison. I understand you've been waiting on the Jakarta project timeline. I actually reviewed those files yesterday. The delay is on our end, and it's completely unacceptable. Can I get your contact information? I'll personally ensure you get a revised timeline by Tuesday. Harrison blinked, thrown off his rhythm by someone actually acknowledging the problem instead of defending it. You'll personally ensure it? Yes, sir, with Ms. Whitmore's approval, of course. Ethan glanced at Vanessa, who nodded slightly. We've been terrible at communication on this project. You deserve better. Something in Harrison's posture shifted. Well, at least someone here understands customer service. Tuesday, you said? Tuesday. You have my word. After Harrison left, somewhat mollified, Vanessa let out a long breath. I don't have a Jakarta project timeline. I know. But I'll create one this weekend, run it by you Monday, and send it to him Tuesday. You just promised weekend work that isn't in your contract. I promised to solve a problem. The hours don't matter. Ethan paused. Is that okay? I should have checked with you first. Oh, yes, it's more than okay. It's the first time someone's treated my problems like they're worth solving instead of obstacles to their own agenda. Vanessa's expression softened slightly. You're making me look competent, Ethan. That's a rare gift. You are competent. You just needed someone to handle the translation part. If you keep saying things like that, I'm going to have to actually hire you permanently. Can't afford me, Ethan said lightly. I'm very expensive. That's not expensive enough. Vanessa checked her watch, and it's almost 10. You should probably get Sophie home before she passes out in the origami. They collected Sophie, who'd accumulated an impressive pile of paper creations and a new best friend in Maya. The goodbye between the two girls involved promises to maybe see each other again sometime if the grown-ups have more fancy parties. In the car heading home, Vanessa had insisted on sending them in one of Whitmore's town cars. Over Ethan's protests, Sophie leaned against his shoulder. The fancy lady is nice, she said sleepily. She came to check on us 3 times. She asked about you a lot. She did? Yeah, she wanted to know if you were always smart or if you got smart later. I told her you were always smart, but you got quieter after Mom left. Sophie yawned. Was that okay to say? Ethan's chest tightened. Yeah, sweetheart, that was okay. Good, because it's true. She was quiet for a moment. Dad, are you going to stop being a waiter? I don't know yet, maybe. I think you should. You smile more when you do the language stuff. Even when you're tired, you smile different. Out of the mouths of 6-year-olds, Ethan thought. Perfect observations delivered without any understanding of how complicated the truth actually was. By the time they got home, Sophie was fully asleep. He carried her upstairs, still in her party dress, and tucked her into bed with her collection of paper animals arranged carefully on her nightstand. His phone buzzed as he was changing out of the tuxedo. Vanessa, you were exceptional tonight. Thank you. Just doing the job. No. You were doing something different, something I haven't seen before. He stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Finally, what's that? Caring about whether people actually understand each other. Most interpreters just translate words. You translate intention. Is that worth something to the right people? Everything. Ethan sat on the edge of his pull-out couch, staring at those words until his phone screen went dark. Monday morning brought an email from Vanessa with the subject line, Proposition. He opened it while Sophie ate cereal before school, half expecting another negotiation offer. Instead, he found a job description. Director of International Relations, Whitmore Industries. Salary, $140,000 annually. Benefits, full health insurance, 401k matching, 4 weeks vacation. Responsibilities, cultural consulting, high-level interpretation, international client relations, team leadership. Below the description, a single line from Vanessa. Think about it. No pressure. But I meant what I said Saturday. You're doing something different. We need that. Sophie looked up from her cereal. Why do you look weird? I just got offered a real job. You have a real job. A different real job, one that pays better, has insurance. Sophie considered this seriously. Would you have to work more? Probably. But you'd be using your languages, the ones that make you smile different? Yeah, I would. Then you should do it. She returned to her cereal with the certainty of someone who'd just solved a complex equation. Obviously, Ethan thought. If only it were that simple. He spent Monday in a haze of indecision, working his lunch shift at Oralee while mentally calculating whether $140,000 could actually be real, whether he could trust it, whether accepting meant giving up the safety he'd spent 7 years building. Tuesday, he created the Jakarta timeline for Robert Harrison, sent it to Vanessa for review, then delivered it exactly as promised. Harrison sent back a terse acceptable, which, from a man like that, probably counted as enthusiastic approval. Wednesday, Sophie came home from school with a permission slip for the Winter Science Fair. Cost, $40 for materials. Deadline, Friday. Ethan looked at his bank account, Thin, as always, but manageable with careful timing, and signed the form. Thursday, his car's transmission finally gave up pretending to function. The mechanic quoted him $2,300 for repairs. Or, the mechanic added sympathetically, you could sell it for parts and buy something more reliable. Ethan sat in the mechanic's waiting room, doing the math. Without the car, he couldn't reliably get to Aurélie, couldn't get Sophie to school, couldn't manage the delicate logistics that kept their life functioning. With the car repair, he'd drain his savings completely. He called Vanessa without letting himself overthink it. I need to accept your offer, he said when she answered. The job, Director of International Relations, if it's still available. It's available. A pause. What changed? My transmission died. My daughter needs $40 for a science fair. And I just realized I've been choosing survival over living for 7 years straight. When can you start? I need to give Aurélie 2 weeks' notice. After that, I'm yours. What? We'll make it work. Vanessa's voice carried something he couldn't quite identify. Satisfaction, maybe, or relief. Ethan, you're making the right choice. I hope so. Trust me. I'm always right about these things. He laughed despite the anxiety twisting his stomach. That sounds like something someone who's wrong a lot would say. Come by the office Friday. We'll do paperwork, get you set up properly. And Ethan, congratulations. You just stopped hiding. After he hung up, Ethan sat in the mechanic's waiting room for a long time, his phone heavy in his hand. He'd just made a decision that would change everything. Sophie's stability, his carefully constructed safety, the entire architecture of their life. It should have felt terrifying. Instead, it felt like finally exhaling after holding his breath for 7 years straight. Friday's paperwork session turned into a 3-hour deep dive into Whitmore Industries' actual structure, international partnerships, and Vanessa's vision for expanding their cultural competency. Most corporations treat international relations like translation, she explained, spreading files across her office conference table. They think if you convert the words you've communicated, you prove that's garbage. Real communication requires understanding context, culture, intention, all the things that don't translate neatly. So what's my actual job? Build a team that does what you do. Train them. Lead them. Make Whitmore Industries the company that actually understands its international partners, instead of just making deals with them. She pushed a folder toward him. These are our current problem accounts. Places where communication has failed, relationships have soured, deals have stalled. Fix them. Ethan opened the folder. 27 accounts spanning 14 countries. Millions of dollars in stalled negotiations, damaged relationships. Cultural misunderstandings that had calcified into actual business problems. This is a lot, he said carefully. This is everything. Welcome to real work, Ethan. Think you can handle it? He looked at the files, then at Vanessa, then back at the files. Thought about Sophie's science fair permission slip, about 7 years of invisibility, about his mother's unfinished legacy. Yeah, he said, I can handle it. His last shift at Aurélie was a strange kind of mourning. Marcus threw him an impromptu goodbye party in the break room, cheap champagne and grocery store cake that the kitchen staff had decorated with "Good luck, Ethan" in slightly crooked frosting letters. We're going to miss you, Marcus said, raising his plastic cup. You were the best waiter who was clearly too smart to be waiting tables. I tried to hide it. You failed, spectacularly. Marcus grinned. Now go be impressive somewhere that actually appreciates it. The other servers filtered through with variations on the same theme: surprise, pride, a little bit of envy. No one had expected the quiet guy who never made waves to suddenly jump into corporate consulting. Ethan wasn't entirely sure he'd expected it either. Table 7 remained empty his entire last shift, though he'd half expected Vanessa to show up for some kind of symbolic farewell. She didn't. Instead, a delivery arrived at 9 p.m., a box with his name on it, delivered by messenger. Inside, a leather portfolio embossed with Director Cole on the front, and a note in Vanessa's precise handwriting. For carrying your new life. Don't lose it. See you Monday. Ethan ran his fingers over the embossed letters, feeling the weight of a title he hadn't earned yet but was about to try deserving. Monday morning, December 20th, he walked into Whitmore Industries wearing a new suit, not as expensive as the borrowed ones, but and carrying the leather portfolio like a shield against imposter syndrome. His office was on the 38th floor, corner position, with windows overlooking Lake Michigan and the kind of view that made Chicago look navigable instead of overwhelming. The nameplate on the door read, Ethan Cole, Director of International Relations, in letters that felt simultaneously too large and exactly right. Vanessa found him standing in front of his desk, staring at the office like he wasn't sure it was real. You settling in? I'm experiencing mild dissociation. Normal first-day reaction. She handed him a coffee. Staff meeting in 20 minutes. I'm introducing you to the senior leadership team. Try not to let them intimidate you. Half of them are idiots who inherited their positions. Comforting. True, though. She leaned against his desk. Ethan, I need you to understand something. You're going to get pushback. People are going to question why I hired a waiter with no formal business degree for a senior position. They're going to test you, dismiss you, try to undermine you. Also comforting. But here's what they don't know yet. Vanessa's expression went serious. You're the first person I've hired in 3 years who actually solves problems instead of creating them. You care about whether things work, not just whether they look good in reports. That's rare. That's valuable. So when they push back, remember that. The staff meeting was exactly as uncomfortable as predicted. 12 senior executives, all sizing him up with varying degrees of skepticism. David, the guy from the Portuguese negotiation, gave him an encouraging nod, but the others ranged from suspicious to openly hostile. Vanessa's introduction was characteristically blunt. This is Ethan Cole, our new Director of International Relations. He speaks 7 languages fluently, has more cultural intelligence in his left hand than most of you have in your entire careers, and has already closed 3 deals that were dead in the water. If you have a problem with his hiring, take it up with me privately so I can explain why you're wrong. Subtle, Ethan thought, but effective. The meeting proceeded with the usual corporate theater, budget reports, quarterly projections, strategic initiatives that sounded impressive but meant very little. Ethan stayed quiet, observing, filing away information about power dynamics and who actually made decisions versus who just talked loudly. Afterward, a woman named Patricia, CFO, according to her nameplate, cornered him by the coffee station. 7 languages, she said flatly. That's your whole resume? Is she? That and 7 years raising a daughter while working full-time. Turns out both require multitasking, cultural sensitivity, and crisis management under pressure. Patricia's expression didn't soften, but something shifted behind her eyes. Single parent? Since she was 6 months old. Rough. She poured coffee with precise movements. My ex left when our kids were 4 and 6. Courts gave me custody and no support. I worked 3 jobs for 8 years before I got my MBA. Sounds familiar? So here's free advice, Cole. Half these people will hate you because Vanessa likes you. The other half will test you until you prove you deserve to be here. Don't waste energy on either group. Just do good work. Good work is the only defense that actually matters. She walked away before he could respond, leaving Ethan alone with his coffee and the distinct feeling he'd just been warned and advised simultaneously. His first real assignment came that afternoon. Robert Harrison's company, the one from the Christmas gala, had escalated their complaints to legal threats. Vanessa dropped the file on his desk with a thud. Fix this. You promised him a timeline, he followed it, and now our Jakarta team is claiming they never received the specs. Harrison's threatening to sue for breach of contract. What actually happened? What? Our Jakarta team received the specs but didn't read them because they assumed they were standard templates. Classic cultural miscommunication. Harrison's American team sent detailed specifications because that's American business culture. Jakarta team expected face-to-face relationship building first because that's Indonesian business culture. Neither side understood the other's expectations. Ethan skimmed the file. Give me 24 hours. He spent that evening calling Jakarta. 11 p.m. his time, noon theirs. and speaking with the team lead in a combination of English and basic Indonesian he'd picked up from library books and patient shopkeepers. Not apologizing for the miscommunication, just acknowledging the different expectations and proposing a solution that honored both sides' approaches. Then he called Harrison, caught him at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, and walked him through what had happened without assigning blame. "Look," Ethan said. "Your specs were perfect, detailed, clear, professional, but the Jakarta team needed relationship context before diving into technical details. That's not wrong, it's just different. Can we set up a video call where you meet them face-to-face, establish rapport, then review the specs together?" Harrison was quiet for a long moment. "You're saying I wasn't wrong, but I wasn't right either. I'm saying different business cultures need different approaches. And Whitmore should have bridged that gap earlier instead of letting it become a legal problem." "Damn right you should have." But Harrison's tone had shifted from aggressive to merely irritated. "Set up the call. I'll give you one chance to fix this." The call happened Friday morning. Harrison in New York, Jakarta team in Indonesia, Ethan facilitating from Chicago. He opened by having everyone introduce themselves personally, share something about their background, establish human connection before business discussion. Then he guided them through the specs, translating not just language, but also intention and cultural context. 2 hours later, they had a revised timeline that both sides actually understood and agreed to. Harrison sent him a direct email afterward. "You just saved us from a lawsuit and probably saved our partnership. Whitmore's lucky to have you. Don't let them waste this." Ethan forwarded it to Vanessa with a single line. "Problem solved." Her response came immediately. "You're making my other directors look bad. Keep it up." That weekend, Sophie wanted to celebrate his first successful week with their traditional ice cream trip. They went to the same neighborhood place, ordered the same flavors, sat at the same table. "Are you still scared?" Sophie asked around her chocolate rainbow sprinkle mouthful. "About the job?" Terrified. "But you fixed the problem with the angry man, right?" "Yeah, I did." "Then why are you scared?" Such simple logic, such devastating accuracy. "Because what if I can't fix the next problem?" Ethan said honestly. "What if I got lucky this time, and next time everyone realizes I don't actually know what I'm doing?" Sophie considered this seriously, her 6-year-old face solemn. "But you do know. You just think you don't because you were hiding for so long. Mrs. Chen says sometimes people forget who they are when they're busy being what other people need. Mrs. Chen is wise." "She really is." Sophie grinned suddenly. "Plus, the fancy lady believes you can do it. And she's really smart, I can tell." "How can you tell?" "Because she picked you." Sophie said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Ethan's chest did something complicated, tightened and loosened simultaneously, like a knot untying itself. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I guess she did." They finished their ice cream as winter settled deeper around Chicago, the December cold sharp enough to make breathing feel significant. Walking home, Sophie's hand warm in his, Ethan thought about Vanessa's words from that first week. "You just stopped hiding." Maybe she was right. Maybe for the first time in 7 years, he was finally visible. And maybe, just maybe, being seen wasn't as dangerous as he'd spent all this time believing. The phone call came on a Tuesday in January, 3 weeks into Ethan's new position, from a number he didn't recognize with a Boston area code. He almost didn't answer, probably another spam call about his car's extended warranty or student loans he'd never finished taking out. But something made him pick up during his lunch break, standing in his office with Lake Michigan frozen gray beyond the windows. "Is this Ethan Cole?" The voice was elderly, male, with the careful diction of someone who'd spent a lifetime choosing words precisely. "Yes. Who's calling?" "My name is Richard Holloway. You don't know me, but I knew your mother. Grace Cole. I need to speak with you about something important. Could we meet?" Ethan's hand tightened on the phone. His mother had died when he was 19, cancer that moved fast and didn't leave time for proper goodbyes. He rarely talked about her, rarely let himself remember the way she'd encouraged his languages, even when they couldn't afford the textbooks. How she'd smiled when he came home speaking phrases she'd never heard. "How did you know my mother?" he asked carefully. "She studied at my institute." Briefly, a very long time ago. Richard's voice carried something complicated. Regret, maybe, or old guilt. Please, I promise this matters. Could you meet me tomorrow? I'm in Chicago for the week. There's something you need to know about who your mother was. Ethan agreed before he could talk himself out of it, gave Richard the address of a coffee shop near his apartment, and spent the rest of the workday distracted by questions he didn't know how to articulate. That evening, Sophie noticed his mood immediately. "You're thinking too loud," she announced over dinner. Mac and cheese from a box, their traditional Tuesday meal. "Someone called me today, about Grandma Grace." Sophie's eyes went wide. She'd never met Ethan's mother, knew her only through the few photos Ethan kept and the stories he occasionally told when Sophie asked about family. What did they want? "I don't know yet. I'm meeting him tomorrow." Ethan pushed his mac and cheese around his plate. "He said he knew her a long time ago, before I was born." "Are you scared?" More confused than scared. Sophie considered this with her usual seriousness. Maybe he has good stories. About who she was when she was younger. You never talk much about her. I don't remember enough to talk much. Then maybe he'll help you remember. Sophie reached across the table, patted his hand with sticky 6-year-old fingers. It's okay to find out new things about people, even if they're gone. When had his daughter become the wise one in their relationship? Ethan wondered. Probably somewhere between Amanda leaving and him learning to survive. "You're pretty smart, you know that?" "Mrs. Chen says I get it from you and Grandma Grace." Sophie grinned. "So really, I get it from her. Which means you should definitely meet the man who knew her." The coffee shop was deliberately neutral territory. Not too nice, not too run down, the kind of place where you could have serious conversations without feeling like you were on stage. Ethan arrived early, ordered coffee he didn't want, and sat by the window watching people hurry through January's bitter cold. Richard Holloway arrived exactly on time, which somehow didn't surprise Ethan at all. He was probably in his mid-70s, still moving with careful precision, dressed in wool and tweed like someone who'd stopped updating their wardrobe sometime in the 1980s and saw no reason to start. But his eyes were sharp, assessing, and when he spotted Ethan, something in his expression shifted, recognition mixed with something that looked almost like pain. "Ethan." Richard extended his hand. "Thank you for meeting me." "You said you knew my mother." "I did. May I sit?" They settled into uncomfortable chairs across from each other, Richard with tea that he didn't drink, Ethan with coffee going cold between his hands. "Your mother came to my institute in 1989, Richard began without preamble. She was 22 years old, brilliant, and had already taught herself 3 languages from library books and borrowed textbooks. I still run, the Holloway Institute for Applied Linguistics in Boston. Small operation, but we've produced some remarkably talented translators and interpreters over the years. Grace applied for our advanced program. Her application was extraordinary. Ethan's chest tightened. His mother had never mentioned any of this. "She studied with us for 8 months, Richard continued. She was the most naturally gifted student I'd seen in 30 years of teaching. Languages weren't just patterns to her. They were windows into how people think, how cultures construct meaning. She could hear the spaces between words, the intentions that don't translate. It was remarkable." "So what happened?" Ethan asked quietly. Richard's expression clouded. "Life happened. She got pregnant. The father wasn't in the picture. I never learned details, and Grace didn't share them. She tried to continue studying, but our program was intensive, demanding, and she couldn't manage both. I told her to take a leave, come back after the baby was born. But she never did. She raised me instead. Yes, and apparently sacrificed everything she could have become in the process." Richard finally looked directly at Ethan. "I've spent 30 years regretting that I didn't do more to help her, that I let financial circumstances and social pressure push out the most talented linguist I'd ever taught. When I learned she'd died, I tracked down the obituary years later. I promised myself that if I ever found her child, I'd make sure they knew who she really was." Ethan stared at his coffee, processing information that rewrote his understanding of his entire childhood. His mother, brilliant. His mother, sacrificing dreams he'd never known existed. His mother, seeing him struggle through language textbooks and never once saying she'd walked that same path decades earlier. How did you find me? He managed. I've been looking for 15 years. Grace Cole is a common name, and you moved around a lot after she died. But 2 months ago, I saw an article in a business journal about Whitmore Industries hiring an unusual director of international relations, a self-taught polyglot with no formal credentials but remarkable talent. The name matched. I took a chance. That article. Ethan laughed without humor. Vanessa's publicity team. I told them not to run it. I'm glad they didn't listen. Richard leaned forward slightly. Ethan, I didn't come here just to tell you about your mother. I came to tell you that what you're doing, the translation work, the cultural understanding, the way you bridge gaps between people, that's not random talent. That's your mother's gift, passed down. You inherited something extraordinary from her. I learned languages from YouTube. You learned languages the same way she did, by understanding that language is fundamentally about human connection, not just vocabulary and grammar. That's not teachable. That's innate. Richard pulled a folder from his bag, set it on the table. These are some of her papers from when she studied with us. Her notes, her analyses, her insights. I thought you should have them. Ethan opened the folder with hands that weren't quite steady. Inside, neat handwriting filled pages of linguistic analysis. His mother's handwriting, younger but unmistakably hers. Notes about Mandarin tonal patterns. Observations about how Portuguese verb conjugation reflected cultural attitudes toward time. Theories about language acquisition that read more like poetry than academic writing. On the last page, dated 3 days before she must have left the Institute, a single line. Languages are how we prove we're not alone in our own heads. She wrote that, Richard said quietly, the day she told me she was pregnant and couldn't continue. I asked her if she regretted it. She said the baby mattered more than anything she might accomplish. But I always wondered if she really believed that, or if she was just trying to convince herself. Ethan closed the folder carefully. She never told me any of this. Never mentioned your institute, never talked about studying linguistics formally. Maybe she didn't want you to feel like you owed her something, or maybe it hurt too much to remember what she'd given up. Richard finished his tea. But Ethan, you need to understand something. Your mother's talent wasn't wasted. She passed it to you. And now you're doing what she never got the chance to do, using that gift to bridge cultures, to help people understand each other. That's not failure. That's legacy. They sat in silence for a long moment, the coffee shop's noise washing around them like water around stones. Thank you, Ethan said finally, for finding me, for telling me. There's one more thing. Richard hesitated. The Institute still exists, still trains linguists. If you ever wanted to formalize your skills, study the theory behind what you do instinctively. The program is there. No cost. Consider it a scholarship in your mother's name. I have a daughter, a job. I can't just, The program is flexible. Remote options, weekend intensives, self-paced study. Grace never got to finish, but you could. Richard stood, gathering his coat. Think about it. No pressure, but the offer stands. After Richard left, Ethan sat alone with his mother's papers for another hour, reading her handwriting, trying to reconcile the woman he remembered, tired, working 2 jobs, making sure he had textbooks even when they couldn't afford heat, with this brilliant young linguist who'd sacrificed everything. His phone buzzed. Vanessa, where are you? We have the German team video conference in 20 minutes. Ethan checked his watch, swore quietly, and grabbed his coat. He made it back to the office with 3 minutes to spare, his mother's papers tucked carefully in his portfolio. Vanessa was waiting outside the conference room, looking irritated. You're never late. What happened? Family thing. I'll explain later. He straightened his tie. German team ready? Ready and impatient. She studied his face. Are you okay? Honestly, I have no idea. The video conference was routine. Contract revisions, timeline negotiations, cultural clarifications that Ethan handled automatically while his mind kept drifting back to his mother's handwriting. Her theories, the life she'd abandoned to raise him. Afterward, Vanessa cornered him in his office. Talk, now. You've been distracted all afternoon, which is extremely unlike you. So Ethan told her. About Richard, about his mother, about the institute and the scholarship, and the realization that everything he'd taught himself had been passed down from a brilliant woman he'd barely understood. Vanessa listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. "So your mother was exceptional," she said when he finished, "and she gave that up to raise you. And now you're wondering if you're somehow obligated to finish what she started." Something like that. That's garbage thinking. Vanessa's bluntness was almost comforting. Your mother made her choice. You're making yours. They don't have to be the same choice for both to be valid. But what if I'm wasting what she gave me? What if I could be doing more? Ethan, you're doing remarkable work. You've fixed 6 impossible client relationships in 3 weeks. You've built bridges that our company didn't even know needed building. That's not wasting anything. That's honoring exactly what your mother wanted you to become. How do you know what she wanted? Because she spent her life making sure you had opportunities she didn't. That's not sacrifice for nothing. That's investment in a future she knew she wouldn't see. Vanessa leaned against his desk. The question isn't whether you're honoring her legacy. The question is whether you're building your own. Ethan pulled out his mother's papers, showed Vanessa the last line. Languages are how we prove we're not alone in our own heads. She understood something fundamental, he said quietly, about why this work matters, about what language actually does. So do you. That's why you're good at this. Vanessa paused. Are you considering the Institute program? I don't know. Part of me thinks I should. Part of me thinks I'm fine as I am. But both can be true. She stood to leave, then stopped at the door. For what it's worth, Ethan, I think your mother would be proud of you. Not because you're finishing her work, but because you're doing your own. That night, Sophie found him staring at his mother's papers at the kitchen table, long after bedtime. Can't sleep? She asked, patting out in her pajamas. Just thinking. About Grandma Grace? Yeah. He pulled her onto his lap. The man I met today told me she was really talented, that she could have been famous, important, but she chose to raise me instead. Sophie considered this seriously. Was she sad about it? I don't know, maybe sometimes. But she still chose you, right? Even knowing what she'd miss. Yeah, she did. Then maybe she didn't think she was missing anything important. Sophie yawned. Maybe you were the important thing. Hey. The simple certainty of it cracked something open in Ethan's chest. His daughter, 6 years old, understanding something he'd been struggling with all day. How'd you get so wise? I told you, Mrs. Chen says I get it from Grandma Grace. She hugged him. Can I go back to bed now? I'm really sleepy. He tucked her in, came back to the kitchen, and looked at his mother's papers with different eyes. Not a burden, not an obligation, just proof that the gift he'd been carrying his whole life had come from somewhere real, someone who'd understood its value even when she couldn't use it herself. The next morning, Ethan called Richard. I want to take the program, he said. Part-time, flexible schedule. But I want to understand the theory behind what I do. Not to finish my mother's work, to do my own better. Richard's satisfaction was audible. I'll send you the enrollment materials. Welcome to the Institute, Ethan. Your mother would be proud. I hope so, Ethan said. And for the first time since Richard's call, he actually believed it might be true. The following weeks blurred into a rhythm Ethan had never experienced before. Actual routine built on something other than survival. Mornings with Sophie, getting her ready for school with conversations that ranged from why clouds floated to whether dragons would prefer pizza or tacos. Days at Whitmore Industries, navigating client relationships and corporate politics with increasing confidence. Evenings splitting time between Sophie's homework and his own, the Institute's program assignments arriving twice a week via email, reading that felt less like work and more like finally understanding the rules of a game he'd been playing blind for years. Vanessa noticed the change immediately. You're different, she said during a rare lunch break they were sharing in her office, takeout spread across her conference table. More settled, less like you're waiting for permission to exist here. The Institute program helps. Understanding the theory behind what I do instinctively, it's like finally getting the instruction manual after years of guessing. How's Sophie handling the increased workload? She thinks it's cool that we're both doing homework now. Last week she helped me practice Japanese verb conjugations. She's 6, and correcting my pronunciation. Vanessa smiled, genuine, not the corporate expression she wore in meetings. You talk about her like she's your reason for everything. She is. Must be nice, having that kind of clarity. Something shifted in Vanessa's expression, vulnerability showing through cracks in her usual armor. I've spent 6 years running this company and I still can't figure out what I'm actually working toward. Success? Proving something to my dead father? Just not failing spectacularly? Ethan set down his chopsticks. They'd fallen into this pattern lately. Conversations that started professional and drifted personal, like they were both surprised to find someone who understood the weight of carrying things alone. "Why'd you really hire me?" he asked. "And don't say it was just because I speak 7 languages." Vanessa was quiet for a long moment, staring at her untouched pad thai. "Because you were real," she said finally. "Everyone in my world is performing, pretending, calculating their next move. You stood there in your waiter uniform and spoke perfect Mandarin and didn't try to leverage it into anything. You just existed, competently and quietly. And I realized I'd spent 6 years surrounded by people who were all pretending competence while you were actually living it. That's a lot to read into one conversation." Oops. Maybe. But I was right, wasn't I? She looked at him directly. "You're the only person I've hired who hasn't disappointed me yet. Everyone else talks about innovation and cultural sensitivity and then does the bare minimum. You actually care whether things work. Is that really so rare?" "Ye shait. Totomori Watson." "In my world?" "Yes." Vanessa pushed her food around. "Sometimes I think I'm going crazy. Like I'm the only person who notices that half of business is just people pretending to understand each other while actually missing every important detail. You're not crazy. You're just paying attention, which makes me an outlier in my own company." "Great." But she smiled when she said it, tired but genuine. Ethan's phone buzzed. Sophie's school. Sophie feeling sick. "Can you pick her up?" "I have to go," he said, already gathering his things. "Sophie's school. Go. We'll handle the rest." Vanessa paused. "Ethan, thanks for the conversation. It's nice to talk to someone who doesn't need anything from me." He wanted to say that wasn't true, that he needed plenty. This job, her trust, the chance she'd given him to stop hiding. But Sophie needed him more immediately, so he just nodded and left. Sophie had a low-grade fever and a stomachache that turned out to be anxiety about an upcoming presentation on family history. She'd been worrying about it for days, apparently, without telling him. "Everyone else has big families," she explained miserably from the couch, wrapped in blankets. "Grandparents and aunts and uncles. I just have you, and Mrs. Chen, but she's not really family." "Mrs. Chen is absolutely family," Ethan said firmly. "Family isn't just blood, sweetheart. It's people who show up." "But the assignment says to talk about where our family came from. I don't know anything about Grandma Grace, except she died when I was a baby. And I don't know anything about Mom except she left. But..." Ethan felt his chest tighten. They didn't talk about Amanda much. Sophie rarely asked, and he'd been grateful for her lack of curiosity. But apparently she'd been holding these questions quietly, letting them build into anxiety substantial enough to make her physically sick. "Okay," he said. "Let's talk about family then. Real talk." He got out the folder Richard had given him, showed Sophie her grandmother's papers, explained about the Institute, about Grace's gift for languages, about the choices she'd made and the legacy she'd left. "So Grandma Grace was really smart," Sophie said, studying the handwriting with serious attention. "And she gave that to you, and you gave it to me. Basically, what about Mom? Where did she come from?" Ethan had been dreading this question for 6 years. "Your mom came from Seattle. Her family wasn't close. Her parents divorced when she was young, and she didn't talk to them much. She liked traveling, meeting new people. She was good at making friends wherever she went. But not good at staying," Sophie said with 6-year-old bluntness. "No, not good at staying." "Do you miss her?" "Sometimes. Mostly, I miss the version of her I thought existed, the person who wanted the life we were building together. Turns out that person was never real." Sophie processed this quietly. "Is that why you work so hard? Because you're scared I'll leave too?" The question hit like a physical blow. When had his 6-year-old learned to see straight through him? Maybe partly, he admitted, but mostly I work hard because I want to give you a good life, better than what I had. I already have a good life, Sophie said matter-of-factly. We have ice cream Saturdays, and you help with homework, and Mrs. Chen makes me practice Vietnamese even though I'm terrible at it. That's good. You're really not terrible at Vietnamese. I'm pretty terrible. She grinned despite her stomachache. But I'm trying. Like you're trying with the fancy job. We're both trying new things. When did you become the wise one? I've always been wise. You just finally noticed. She snuggled deeper into her blankets. Dad? Can I use Grandma Grace's story for my presentation? About how she was really smart but chose family instead of being famous. Yes, sweetheart. I think she'd like that. Maswat. The presentation went well. Sophie stood in front of her first-grade class and talked about her grandmother who loved languages and her dad who loved them too, and how family sometimes meant choosing what mattered over what looked important. Her teacher sent Ethan a photo of Sophie presenting, serious and proud, and he saved it immediately. That evening, Vanessa texted, "How's Sophie better? Anxiety about a school presentation. She was worried her family wasn't interesting enough. What did you tell her?" That family is about who shows up, not who shares your DNA. Smart. You're good at this parenting thing. I'm making it up as I go. That's what makes you good at it. You're paying attention instead of following a script. Ethan stared at the message, struck by how similar parenting and language work were. Both required reading what people weren't saying, adjusting to cultural context, caring more about connection than performance. The next morning brought an email from Richard with new institute materials and a note. Your mother's cohort is having a reunion next month in Boston. Several of them remember Grace fondly. Would you like to come? Bring Sophie if you'd like. We're planning a family day. Ethan showed the email to Sophie over breakfast. Can we go? She asked immediately. I want to meet people who knew Grandma Grace. It's in Boston. That's far. But you have vacation days now. You told me. From the fancy job. She was right. He did have vacation days, 4 weeks of them. Still unused because the concept of paid time off felt too foreign to trust. Okay, he said. We'll go. It'll be good for both of us. Vanessa approved the time off without hesitation, then added casually, I have business in Boston that weekend anyway. If you and Sophie want company for dinner, let me know. Dishi. Ethan recognized the offer for what it was. Vanessa extending herself beyond professional boundaries, testing whether their growing friendship could exist outside Whitmore Industries' walls. Saturday night was tip by him, he said. Sophie's been wanting to see the aquarium. You could join us. I don't really do aquariums. You also don't really do casual dinners with employees and their 6-year-old daughters. But here we are. Vanessa's laugh was surprised and genuine. Fair point. Text me the details. Boston arrived cold and crisp, the kind of February weekend where the sun looked warm but the wind made your eyes water. The Institute's reunion was held in a converted brownstone in Cambridge, warm and crowded with linguists who all seemed to speak 4 languages simultaneously. Richard found them immediately, greeted Sophie with grandfatherly warmth, and introduced Ethan to a dozen people who'd studied with his mother 35 years ago. They all had stories. Grace had helped them with Mandarin pronunciation. Grace had stayed up all night before exams explaining syntactic theory until it made sense. Grace had been the best among them, the one everyone expected to change the field. She talked about you constantly, one woman named Patricia said, pulling out an old photo. Even pregnant, even exhausted, she lit up when she mentioned her baby. She showed us ultrasound photos like they were doctoral dissertations. The photo showed his mother at 23, laughing, surrounded by textbooks, her hand resting on the small curve of her stomach. She looked happy. Young. Completely unprepared for what choosing him would cost her. Sophie studied the photo seriously. She looks nice. She was, Patricia said. She was brilliant and kind, and she made all of us better linguists just by studying alongside us. Your dad has her gift. We can all see it. After the formal reunion, Richard took them through the Institute's library, floor-to-ceiling books in 40 languages, study carols where students hunched over translations, the quiet hum of people dedicating their lives to understanding how humans communicate. This is where your mother worked, Richard said, showing them a specific carol. She claimed this spot her first week and defended it fiercely. Ethan ran his fingers along the desk's worn surface, imagining his mother here, young and ambitious and full of dreams she'd never complete. Sophie tugged his hand. Dad, she was happy here, right? Before she left? Yeah, sweetheart. I think she was. Then it's okay that she left, because she got to be happy, and then she got you, and then you got me. That's like a story where everyone gets something good. But 6-year-old logic, reframing tragedy into something bearable. Ethan hugged her tight, grateful for her ability to see light in complicated situations. That evening, they met Vanessa at a restaurant near the waterfront, casual by her standards, which still meant it had cloth napkins and a wine list longer than Sophie's arm. Vanessa arrived looking different without her corporate armor, jeans and a sweater, hair loose, the kind of deliberately casual that took effort to achieve naturally. She greeted Sophie first, which earned her immediate approval. Your dad says you did a presentation about your grandmother, Vanessa said after they'd ordered. Yeah, about how she was really smart but chose family instead of being famous. Sophie attacked her breadbasket with enthusiasm. My teacher said it was brave to talk about complicated family stuff. Your teacher's right. Most adults can't talk about complicated family stuff, honestly. That's because adults think everything has to be perfect, Sophie said with the certainty of someone who'd figured out universal truth. But nothing's perfect. Dad says that all the time. Your dad's smart. I know. He gets it from Grandma Grace. Sophie grinned at Ethan. It's a family thing. Dinner conversation drifted easily. Sophie talking about school, Vanessa sharing surprisingly funny stories about terrible business meetings, Ethan watching them interact and feeling something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not quite comfort, but something adjacent to it, like possibility. After dessert, Sophie had lobbied hard for the chocolate cake and won. They walked along the harbor despite the cold. Sophie ran ahead, chasing seagulls with the inexhaustible energy of 6-year-olds. She's great, Vanessa said quietly. You've done good work there. She's done most of the work herself. I just try not to mess her up too badly. But that's probably the best definition of successful parenting I've heard. Vanessa watched Sophie chase birds. You ever wonder what your life would look like if her mother had stayed? Sometimes. But honestly, probably worse. Amanda didn't want to be a mother. She wanted the Instagram version of motherhood. Cute photos, admiration for sacrifice, but none of the actual work. We would have destroyed each other trying to make something work that was never going to. That's remarkably self-aware for someone who was abandoned with a 6-month-old. 7 years of therapy via survival. Ethan smiled without humor. You learn a lot about yourself when you're responsible for another human's entire existence. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. I envy that sometimes. The clarity. I've spent 6 years running a company, and I still don't know what success actually looks like beyond spreadsheets and shareholder meetings. Maybe success is just showing up consistently, being present for the things that matter. Is that from your institute program? That's from watching my daughter face her fears about family presentations while I'm simultaneously trying to figure out how to honor my dead mother's legacy without feeling crushed by it. He shrugged. We're all just making it up as we go. That should be your institute thesis, making it up, a comprehensive study of faking competence until you actually achieve it. Ethan laughed, surprised by the observation's accuracy. You're not wrong, Sophie returned, breathless and grinning. Dad, Vanessa, can we come back tomorrow before we fly home? The aquarium's right there. Vanessa glanced at Ethan, something uncertain in her expression, like she was testing whether the invitation extended beyond one dinner. I don't have any meetings until Monday, she said carefully. Then yeah, Ethan said, we can do the aquarium tomorrow, if you want to join us. I want to join you. The simple directness of it hit harder than it should have. This was Vanessa Whitmore, billionaire, CEO, choosing to spend her Sunday morning with him and Sophie looking at fish tanks instead of doing whatever billionaires normally did with free time. The aquarium visit was chaotic and perfect, Sophie racing between exhibits while Ethan and Vanessa followed at a more reasonable pace, occasionally exchanging amused glances at Sophie's enthusiastic narration of fish facts she was clearly inventing. That one's a vampire squid, Sophie announced confidently at one tank. It drinks blood and can live forever. I don't think that's accurate, Ethan said. It's emotionally accurate, Sophie insisted. Look at its face. That's definitely a vampire. Vanessa laughed, actual surprised laughter that made several nearby families turn and stare at the well-dressed woman who was apparently capable of spontaneous joy. Later, at the penguin exhibit, Sophie pulled Vanessa down to her level. Do you like my dad? She asked with devastating directness. Vanessa's composure cracked visibly. What? It's a simple question. Do you like him? Like him? Sophie, Ethan started, mortified. I'm asking for research purposes, Sophie said seriously. Because you're nice and you make him smile different, and Mrs. Chen says that means something. Vanessa recovered admirably. Your dad is my friend, and an excellent employee. Those are complicated kinds of liking. Juts. That's a politician answer, Sophie observed. Mrs. Chen says politician answers mean you're hiding truth because the truth is complicated. Mrs. Chen is terrifyingly perceptive. I know, right? Sophie grinned. It's okay if you like him. He doesn't have many friends. Just you and the people at work who are also kind of afraid of him because he's good at his job. I'm not afraid of him, Beck. I know. That's why I like you. Sophie patted Vanessa's hand. Plus, you sent him that fancy suit. That was nice. She skipped off to the next exhibit, leaving Ethan and Vanessa staring at each other. I'm sorry, Ethan said. She's been watching too many romantic comedies with Mrs. Chen. She's observant. She's 6 and has no filter, Sat. Maybe that's better than having too many filters. Vanessa watched Sophie press her face against the penguin glass. For what it's worth, she's right. I do like you, in the complicated ways she mentioned. You're the first person in years who doesn't want something from me beyond competent work. That's a low bar for friendship, Maku. In my world, it's the highest bar there is. Vanessa turned to face him directly. I know this is complicated. I'm your boss. There are power dynamics and professional boundaries and probably HR regulations. But I'd like to keep doing this. Dinners and aquariums and conversations that don't involve quarterly projections. If that's okay? Ethan thought about his carefully constructed life, the safety he'd built through invisibility, the risk of letting someone matter. Thought about Sophie's happiness today, her easy acceptance of Vanessa, the way his chest felt lighter when Vanessa laughed. Yeah, he said. That's okay. That's more than okay. They stayed at the aquarium until Sophie's energy finally flagged, then got overpriced lunch at a tourist trap restaurant where Sophie ordered pasta shaped like fish, and Vanessa admitted she'd never actually eaten at a place that served food shaped like animals. You're missing out, Sophie informed her solemnly. Fish pasta tastes way better than regular pasta because it's more fun. Well, I'm learning all kinds of things today, Vanessa said, and caught Ethan's eye with an expression that made his stomach flip in ways he hadn't experienced in 8 years. Flying back to Chicago that evening, Sophie fell asleep on his shoulder before takeoff, clutching a stuffed penguin Vanessa had bought her despite Ethan's protests. His phone buzzed. Vanessa, thank you for this weekend. I forgot what it felt like to just exist without performing. Thank you for coming. Sophie loved it. So did I. I meant what I said at the aquarium. I'd like to keep doing this. Whatever this is, me too. We'll figure out the complicated parts as we go, making it up as we go. Your specialty. He smiled at his phone, watched Chicago's lights emerge below, and thought about how 3 months ago he'd been invisible, hiding behind waiter uniforms and survival arithmetic. Now he was flying home from Boston with his daughter asleep beside him, carrying his mother's papers, building something with someone he'd accidentally let matter. Maybe Richard was right. Maybe this wasn't about finishing his mother's work. Maybe it was about finally doing his own, building a life that honored both the gift she'd given him and the man he was still learning to become. Sophie stirred against his shoulder. Dad? Yeah, sweetheart. Today was really good. Can we do it again sometime? Yeah, we can do it again. Good. She settled back into sleep. I like Vanessa. She's nice. And she looks at you like you're important. She's my boss, Sophie. She has to look at me like I'm important. No, Sophie mumbled, already half asleep. She looks at you like Dad looked at Mom in the old photos, before Mom got the leaving face. Before Ethan could respond, Sophie was fully asleep again, leaving him sitting in the dark plane with that observation echoing in his head. Maybe his 6-year-old saw things adults spent years pretending not to notice. Maybe complicated wasn't the same as impossible. Maybe, for the first time in 7 years, he was finally ready to find out. March brought the kind of false spring Chicago specialized in. 3 warm days that made everyone optimistic before winter remembered it wasn't actually finished yet. Ethan was walking into Whitmore Industries on one of those deceptively warm mornings when David intercepted him at the elevator. "We have a problem," David said without preamble. "Tokyo deal. Complete disaster. The interpreter we hired butchered the cultural protocol so badly that Tanaka-san walked out of the negotiation. Vanessa wants you on a plane tonight." Ethan's mind immediately went to Sophie. "Tonight, I can't just—" "Vanessa said to tell you she already called Mrs. Chen. Your neighbor agreed to stay with Sophie through the weekend. Full compensation. Vanessa's covering it personally." David handed him a folder. "This is everything. Flight leaves at 7. You'll be there Friday morning Tokyo time. Have the weekend to fix whatever the hell our idiot interpreter destroyed. Meeting Monday morning. Think you can salvage this?" "Oui. Os o a te kantipa." Ethan opened the folder. The Tanaka Corporation deal was worth $42 million and represented Whitmore's first major entry into Japanese manufacturing partnerships. According to the notes, their interpreter had used casual Japanese in a formal business setting, failed to observe proper bowing protocol, and apparently called Tanaka-san by his first name without permission, roughly equivalent to showing up to a funeral in a swimsuit. "Yeah," Ethan said. "I can fix this, but I need to talk to Sophie first." "You have until 6. Car to O'Hare leaves from the office." Sophie took the news better than he expected, which somehow made it worse. "It's okay, Dad," she said over video call from Mrs. Chen's apartment, where Vanessa had apparently already arranged for her to go after school. "Mrs. Chen says she'll teach me to make spring rolls, and Vanessa sent over movies and that art kit I wanted." "Vanessa did what?" Mrs. Chen appeared in the frame. "She called me this afternoon. Very organized lady. She handled everything, food, activities, emergency contacts. She even asked about Sophie's bedtime routine." Something in Ethan's chest did a complicated twist. Vanessa had thought of Sophie before thinking of the deal, had made sure his daughter was cared for before demanding he drop everything for Tokyo. "I'll be back Sunday night," he promised Sophie. "Monday morning at the latest. Becky, bring me something cool from Japan. Something nobody else at school has." "Deal." After he hung up, Vanessa appeared in his office doorway. "You didn't have to do all that," Ethan said. "The arrangements for Sophie, you could have scrambled and stressed and probably missed the flight." Vanessa leaned against the doorframe. "I needed you focused on fixing Tokyo, not worried about whether your daughter was eating vegetables. Consider it operational efficiency. Consider it going above and beyond what a boss should do. Maybe I'm a terrible boss who doesn't understand professional boundaries." But she smiled when she said it. "You ready for this? Tokyo's going to be complicated." Complicated is basically my job description at this point. "True." She handed him another folder. Background on Tanaka-san. He's traditional, formal, and deeply invested in proper protocol. Our interpreter treated him like a casual business acquaintance. You need to approach this like you're apologizing to royalty while simultaneously convincing him we're worth a second chance. No pressure. Enormous pressure. But Ethan? Vanessa met his eyes directly. "I trust you with this. You're the only person I'd send." The flight to Tokyo was 13 hours of cramming, reviewing Japanese business protocol, studying Tanaka Corporation's history, memorizing the specific cultural nuances that differentiated Tokyo business culture from other Japanese regions. Ethan's institute training helped, gave him frameworks for understanding the deeper cultural currents beneath surface formality. By the time he landed Friday morning, jet-lagged and running on airport coffee, he'd constructed a plan. Not just an apology, but a genuine demonstration of respect that would show Tanaka-san that Whitmore Industries understood their mistake and valued the partnership enough to make it right. The hotel Vanessa had booked was in Shibuya, modern and efficient. Ethan dropped his bag, showered, changed into his most formal suit, and spent an hour practicing his Japanese. Not just the words, but the tone, the formality level, the subtle body language that communicated respect in Japanese business culture. Then he did something the previous interpreter apparently hadn't considered. He called Richard. "I need cultural advice," Ethan said when Richard answered. "Japanese business protocol. High-stakes apology. How do I show genuine respect without seeming performative?" Well, Richard was quiet for a moment. "Your mother studied in Kyoto for 3 months. Did I mention that?" "No, you didn't." "Yes. She understood something most Western interpreters miss. Japanese business culture isn't about rules. It's about demonstrating that you've taken time to understand what matters to the other person. The formality is an empty ritual. It's proof that you care enough to learn their language, literal and cultural. So how do I prove that to someone who watched our last interpreter destroy his trust? You show him that you know what the previous interpreter didn't. You acknowledge the specific mistakes. You demonstrate that you understand why they were offensive, not just that they broke protocol. And most importantly, you don't rush. Let the conversation develop at his pace, not yours." After he hung up, Ethan spent the rest of Friday researching Tanaka-san specifically. Not just his business history, but interviews he'd given, speeches he'd made, the particular values he emphasized. By Friday evening, Ethan understood something critical. Tanaka-san didn't just want a business partnership. He wanted partners who understood that business was fundamentally about relationships built on mutual respect. Saturday morning, Ethan sent a formal letter to Tanaka-san's office. Not an email, an actual letter, handwritten in formal Japanese, apologizing for the previous meeting's failures and requesting permission to meet again, acknowledging that he had no right to expect forgiveness, but hoped Tanaka-san would allow him the opportunity to demonstrate that Whitmore Industries understood their error. The response came Saturday evening, a formal invitation to tea Sunday afternoon at Tanaka-san's personal office. Tea, not a business meeting. Personal office, not the corporate headquarters. Both signals that Tanaka-san was giving him a chance, but on different terms than the previous negotiation. Ethan showed up Sunday at exactly the specified time. Not early, which would suggest anxiety, not late, which would suggest disrespect. He brought a carefully chosen gift, a first edition of a book on cross-cultural business philosophy that he'd found in a Shibuya bookstore, wrapped with precise attention to Japanese gift-giving protocol. Tanaka-san was in his 60s, formal in a way that felt earned rather than performed. His office was traditional, tatami mats, minimal furniture, a scroll painting that probably cost more than Ethan's annual salary. "Cold-san?" Tanaka-san's greeting was perfectly neutral, neither warm nor cold. A blank canvas Ethan would have to paint with his own conduct. "Tanaka-sama." Ethan bowed with precise formality, the depth and duration calculated to show respect without presuming familiarity. "Thank you for permitting this meeting. I am deeply grateful for your generosity in allowing me to speak with you after our company's previous failures." He presented the gift with both hands, proper form. He presented the gift with, and waited for Tanaka-san to accept it before continuing. They sat for tea, green tea prepared with deliberate ceremony, and Ethan let the silence extend naturally. Americans panicked in silence, tried to fill it with words, but silence in Japanese business culture was space for consideration, for respect. Finally, Tanaka-san spoke. "Your letter was unexpected. Most Americans apologize with many words and little understanding. I hope my letter demonstrated understanding beyond words." It did. You acknowledged specific errors. You named the insults precisely. You did not make excuses. Tanaka-san sipped his tea. "Why did your company send someone so unprepared to our first meeting?" "Because we failed to understand the difference between speaking Japanese and understanding Japan. The previous interpreter knew the language. I hope to demonstrate that I understand something deeper." "And what is that?" "That business partnerships are built on trust earned through demonstrated respect. That respect requires understanding what matters to the other person, not just translating their words. That your willingness to even meet with me today is a gift I have not yet earned, and may never earn, regardless of how this conversation proceeds." Tanaka-san was quiet for a long time. Then he smiled, small, but genuine. "Your Japanese is very good, Cold-san. Where did you learn it?" "From books, native speakers, and years of studying how language reflects culture. But I am still learning. I will always be learning." That humility is rare in American business. Most Americans arrive believing their presence is sufficient. Then most Americans are foolish. Tanaka-san's smile widened slightly. Tell me about your company. Not the business proposal. I have read that already. Tell me why Whitmore Industries deserves a second chance at this partnership. So Ethan told him. Not a sales pitch, but an honest explanation of Vanessa's vision for building international partnerships based on genuine cultural understanding rather than transactional relationships. He talked about his own journey, learning languages as a single father, raising a daughter while building skills, understanding that communication required seeing the person behind the words. You have a daughter? Tanaka-san asked. Yes. Sophie, she's 6. And her mother? Well, left when Sophie was an infant. I've raised her alone since. Something shifted in Tanaka-san's expression. That is difficult. I raised my son alone after my wife died. Business partnerships are important, Cole-san, but family is foundation. A man who understands family understands what truly matters in relationships. They talked for another hour, not about business, but about children, about the challenges of balancing career and parenthood, about what it meant to build something that would last beyond quarterly profits. By the time Ethan left, they hadn't discussed the contract at all. But Tanaka-san walked him to the door personally, which Ethan knew was significant. Monday morning, Tanaka-san said, 10 o'clock. Bring your full proposal. We will discuss business then. But Kole-san, today was about something more important than business. Today was about understanding whether we could trust each other. I believe we can. Ethan bowed deeply. Thank you, Tanaka-sama. I will honor your trust. Monday's meeting was 3 hours of detailed negotiation, contract terms, timeline discussions, quality specifications. But the foundation had been laid Sunday afternoon over tea and conversation about children. By noon, they had a preliminary agreement that was actually stronger than the original proposal. As Ethan was leaving, Tanaka-san stopped him. Cole-san, your daughter, what does she like? Shh. Right now? Marine biology. She wants to be an ocean scientist when she grows up. Tanaka-san smiled. My company has a research partnership with the Okinawa Aquarium. I will send her information. Perhaps someday she will study there. That's incredibly generous. Not generous. Investment in future relationships. Your daughter will remember the Japanese businessman who respected her dreams. Perhaps when she is older, she will remember that business partnerships can be built on genuine care for each other's families. Flying back to Chicago that night, Ethan thought about how his life had become a series of moments where people saw him, really saw him, instead of what he could provide. Vanessa, recognizing his talent. Richard, connecting him to his mother's legacy. Tanaka-san, understanding that trust was built through vulnerability, not performance. He landed Tuesday morning, exhausted and satisfied. Sophie was at school, but Vanessa was waiting at the office. Well? She asked the moment he walked in. Deal's done. Signed preliminary agreement. Full contract pending legal review, but Tanaka-san's committed. Vanessa's expression transformed. Relief, pride, something else he couldn't quite name. How'd you fix it? I treated him like a person instead of a business opportunity. Apparently that's revolutionary in corporate negotiations. It is, actually. She gestured to her office. Come on, I want details. He walked her through the entire weekend. The letter, the tea ceremony, the conversation about children that had built trust before business ever entered the discussion. Vanessa listened with complete focus, occasionally asking questions that showed she understood exactly what he'd done and why it mattered. You built a relationship instead of closing a deal, she said when he finished. That's completely different from what I sent you to do, and infinitely better. Sometimes fixing problems means solving different problems than the ones you were hired to solve. That should be your professional motto. Vanessa leaned back in her chair. Ethan, I need to tell you something. David wants you to train the entire international relations team. Teach them what you do, how you do it. Build a program that creates interpreters who actually understand culture instead of just translating words. That's basically creating a curriculum for something I do instinctively. I know, but if anyone can make instinct teachable, it's you. She paused. There's a salary bump attached, director to senior director. Another 40,000 annually, plus you'd be building something that outlasts any individual negotiation. So what by solution? Ethan's mind immediately went to numbers. Sophie's college fund, their apartment that needed replacing, the security that came from money he'd never had growing up. But then he thought about his mother's papers, her theories about language and connection, the legacy she'd never gotten to build. I want Richard involved, he said. From the Institute. He knew my mother understands the theory behind this work. If I'm building a training program, I want it to honor what she understood about language. Vanessa smiled. Done. Build the proposal, include Richard's involvement, and we'll make it happen. But Ethan, this means you're not just good at your job anymore. You're becoming essential to how this company operates. That's different. That's permanent. You ready for that? No, he said honestly. But I'll figure it out as I go. Making it up as you go. Your true specialty. He picked up Sophie from school that afternoon, listening to her detailed account of spring roll-making with Mrs. Chen and the 3 movies she'd watched and the art project she'd started. Did you bring me something cool from Japan? She asked finally. He handed her a package. Inside, a child's book about Japanese marine biology, written in both English and Japanese, with stunning photographs of coral reefs and deep-sea creatures. Sophie's eyes went wide. This is perfect. How'd you know? Because I pay attention to what matters to you. He told her about Tanaka-san, about the Okinawa Aquarium Research Partnership, about how understanding family had mattered more than understanding business. So you fixed the problem by talking about me? Sophie grinned. I helped with the important fancy job? You always help with the important fancy job. You're the reason I understand what actually matters in relationships. That evening, after Sophie was asleep, Ethan's phone buzzed. Vanessa, thank you for Tokyo, for being exactly who I hoped you'd be. Just doing the job. No. You're doing something better than the job. You're changing how we think about the job. He stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Finally, that sounds terrifying. It should, but you're good at terrifying things. You raised a 6-year-old alone. You learned 7 languages from library books. You walked into Tanaka-san's office and rebuilt trust from nothing. Terrifying is your comfort zone. My comfort zone is macaroni and cheese from a box and ice cream on Saturdays. That too. You contain multitudes. Ethan smiled at his phone, thought about Sophie's observation from the plane, that Vanessa looked at him like he was important, not like an employee, like someone who mattered beyond what he could provide. His phone rang. Vanessa, not texting. Hey, he answered. Are you busy? Her voice carried something uncertain, vulnerable in ways she never allowed at the office. Sophie's asleep. I'm staring at Tokyo jet lag and pretending I might sleep tonight. Why? I wanted to hear your voice. Is that weird? That feels weird. It's not weird. I'm not good at this, Vanessa said abruptly. At being a person instead of a CEO. At wanting things that don't fit neatly into professional categories. At caring about someone in ways that could complicate everything we've built professionally. Ethan's heart kicked against his ribs. Vanessa, who? Let me finish. Please. She took an audible breath. You went to Tokyo and fixed something that should have been impossible to fix. And the entire time you were gone, I wasn't worried about the deal. I was worried about whether you were eating properly, whether jet lag was manageable, whether you missed Sophie too much to focus. Those aren't boss concerns. Those are something else entirely. What are they? I don't know yet. That's what terrifies me. Vanessa laughed, but it sounded strained. I've spent 6 years building walls that keep business clean and emotions manageable. You walked into my restaurant speaking Mandarin, and every single wall started developing cracks. Now I'm calling you at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday just because I wanted to hear your voice, and I have no idea what that means or how to handle it. Ethan sat on his pull-out couch, staring at the ceiling where Sophie's turtle nightlight projected stars from her room. Thought about Amanda leaving, about 7 years of protecting Sophie from his own vulnerabilities, about the careful architecture of safety he'd built through emotional distance. I'm scared too, he said finally. Not of you, of mattering to someone again, of letting someone matter to me. Last time I did that, She left, and I spent 7 years teaching myself how to be invisible so it couldn't happen again. And now here you are, seeing me anyway, and I don't know if I remember how to do this. Do what? Let someone in. Risk caring about someone who could leave. Sophie's different. She's my daughter. That's non-negotiable permanence. But adults? Adults leave. Adults decide you're not worth the complication. Adults choose themselves, and I can't blame them for that. But I also can't survive it again with a 6-year-old watching me fall apart. I'm not Amanda, Vanessa said quietly. I know. But you're also my boss. And there are power dynamics and professional complications and probably 12 HR violations brewing in this conversation alone. We can't just decide this is simple because we want it to be. Nothing about us has been simple since you spoke Mandarin in my restaurant. Vanessa's voice steadied, shifted into something more certain. But Ethan, I'm not asking for simple. I'm asking if you want to figure out complicated together. As equals, not boss and employee. As two people who accidentally found something real in the middle of quarterly earnings reports and international negotiations. Sophie asked me in Boston if you liked me. Liked me. Her exact words. What did you tell her? That it was complicated. She said complicated wasn't the same as impossible. Your 6-year-old is wiser than both of us combined. She really is. Ethan closed his eyes, made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. I want to figure out complicated together. I'm terrified and I'll probably mess it up. And Sophie's going to have opinions about everything. But yeah, I want to try. Asanki. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that Ethan wondered if he'd miscalculated, pushed too far, assumed too much. Then Vanessa laughed, genuine, relieved, slightly manic. Thank God. I've been rehearsing this conversation for 3 days, and I had no idea how it would go. David told me I was going to implode the best professional relationship I'd built in 6 years. Patricia said I should wait 6 months and reassess. But Sophie told me at the aquarium that you smile different around me, and I couldn't stop thinking about that. Sophie told you what? At the penguin exhibit, while you were checking on her origami. She said you smile different around me than you do around other people. She said it meant something, and I should pay attention. Vanessa paused. Your daughter is an excellent wingman, by the way. Very subtle. Ethan groaned. She's 6 and apparently running reconnaissance on my emotional state. This is what my life has become. Could be worse. You could be a billionaire CEO calling her employee at 10 p.m. confessing feelings that violate approximately 17 corporate policies. How do we actually do this? Ethan asked, without destroying what we've built professionally? Ishikiwa. Carefully. Honestly. We tell HR tomorrow, establish clear boundaries between professional and personal, and we're transparent with everyone about what's happening, so nobody can claim impropriety later. Vanessa's CEO voice clicked into place, practical, organized, handling complications. I'll talk to legal about relationship disclosure policies. We'll document everything properly. And if anyone has concerns about favoritism or conflict of interest, we address them directly. Chiyi bias pashi goang. You've thought about this. I've thought about nothing else for 2 weeks, including contingency plans if you said no tonight. What was the contingency plan? Professionally supportive distance and approximately 8 years of private regret. That's bleak. Us. That's realistic. I don't do casual connections, Ethan. If I'm going to care about someone, I care completely. Which means if this doesn't work, it'll hurt professionally and personally. I'm choosing to risk that. I need to know you're choosing the same thing. Ethan thought about his mother's papers, her line about languages proving we're not alone in our own heads. Thought about 7 years of deliberate loneliness designed to protect Sophie from his vulnerabilities. Thought about Vanessa at the aquarium, laughing at Sophie's invented fish facts, looking more real than she'd ever looked in corporate meetings. I'm choosing the same thing, he said, completely, terrifyingly, with full knowledge that Sophie's going to have extensive opinions about this development. I'm prepared for Sophie's opinions. I'm less prepared for everything else. But we'll figure it out. They talked for another hour, about logistics and boundaries and how to handle the professional complications. about hopes and fears and the strange territory of being adults trying to build something real while carrying the weight of their respective responsibilities. About Sophie and how they'd navigate that particular complexity together. When they finally hung up, Ethan lay on his pull-out couch feeling simultaneously terrified and hopeful, like he'd just signed a contract whose terms he didn't fully understand, but whose outcome might actually be worth the risk. His phone buzzed one more time. Vanessa. Thank you for being brave enough to try complicated. Thank you for seeing me when I was trying to stay invisible. That was never actually working. You're terrible at invisible. 7 years of practice says otherwise. 7 years of fooling everyone except the people paying attention. I was always paying attention. The next morning, Ethan told Sophie over breakfast, Vanessa and I are going to try dating, like, officially. I wanted you to know before anyone else. Sophie looked up from her cereal with an expression of profound 6-year-old satisfaction. Finally, I've been waiting forever. You've known her for 3 months. That's forever in kid time. Sophie grinned. Can I be in the wedding? We're not. Sophie, we're just starting to date. Nobody's talking about weddings. But when you do, can I be in it? Because I should definitely be in it. I basically made this happen. You absolutely did not make this happen. I asked her at the aquarium if she liked you. That's called being a good wingman. Mrs. Chen taught me that word. Mrs. Chen is teaching you way too much. Mrs. Chen says you needed someone to help because you're bad at noticing when people like you. Sophie returned to her cereal, completely satisfied with her role in the situation. Ethan texted Vanessa. Sophie's already planning our wedding, just so you know what we're dealing with. I expect nothing less. She's efficient. I admire that in a person. The HR meeting that afternoon was exactly as awkward as expected. Patricia from finance, the same Patricia who'd warned him on his first day, sat across from them with an expression of resigned acceptance. So you're dating your direct report, she said flatly. You understand this is a nightmare from a liability perspective, which is why we're disclosing it immediately, Vanessa said, and establishing clear protocols. Ethan reports to David for performance reviews and salary decisions. I recuse myself from any discussions about his compensation or professional advancement. We document everything. Patricia looked at Ethan. You comfortable with this arrangement? Because if there's any pressure, any sense that your job depends on this relationship, there isn't, Ethan interrupted. Vanessa asked. I said yes. We're both adults making an informed choice with full awareness of the complications. And if it doesn't work out, then we'll handle it professionally, Vanessa said. The same way adults handle any relationship that ends. Maturely, with respect, and with minimal disruption to operations. Patricia sighed. I'll draw up the disclosure paperwork, but for the record, this is the most complicated HR situation we've had in 4 years, and David's going to be insufferable about being proven right. David knew? Ethan asked. David called it 3 months ago, said you two had chemistry that was going to either implode spectacularly or result in this exact conversation. Patricia stood. Welcome to complicated, you two. Try not to destroy my quarterly reports in the process. Spanna. Mashkati. After she left, Ethan and Vanessa sat in the conference room staring at each other. That went better than expected, Vanessa said. Patricia hates us a little bit. Patricia hates everyone a little bit. It's her natural state. Vanessa smiled. We just officially made this real, in front of HR and legal documentation. There's no backing out gracefully now. Were you planning to back out? No. But having it documented makes it feel permanent, in a way that's terrifying and exactly what I wanted simultaneously. Ethan reached across the table, took her hand, the first time he'd touched her deliberately, intentionally, outside of professional contexts. Permanent and terrifying, he said. Sounds like everything worthwhile I've ever done. Vanessa squeezed his hand, smiled with genuine warmth that transformed her entire face. Then let's go be permanently terrified together. Starting with dinner tonight, you, me, and Sophie, officially, as a whatever we are. A work in progress? Perfect. I excel at projects that require ongoing development. That evening, they went to a pizza place Sophie loved. Casual, loud, with checkered tablecloths and breadsticks that arrived infinite and warm. Sophie ordered pepperoni. Vanessa ordered margarita, and Ethan ordered combination while watching his daughter and his girlfriend navigate their first official meal together. "So," Sophie said with the directness only 6-year-olds achieve naturally, "are you my dad's girlfriend now?" "Yes," Vanessa said without hesitation. "If that's okay with you. But it's definitely okay, but I have rules." "Rules?" Ethan asked. "Yeah, rules." Sophie ticked them off on her fingers. 1. You have to be nice to Dad. 2. You can't leave like Mom did. 3. If you're going to be around a lot, you should learn about marine biology because that's important to me. And 4. You have to like Mrs. Chen because she's family, even though she's not blood family. Vanessa listened with complete seriousness. "Those are excellent rules. I agree to all of them. Do you have rules for your dad too?" "Yeah, he has to let you see him being silly sometimes. He's really funny when he's not being serious. And he has to teach you at least one language because that's his thing. And he has to stop working so much that he forgets to have fun." "Also excellent rules," Vanessa said. "I'll make sure he follows them." "Cool." Sophie grinned, satisfied. "Okay, you can date my dad. But if you mess up, I'm going to know. I notice everything." "I believe you," Vanessa said solemnly. "I'll do my best not to mess up." After dinner, walking to the car, Sophie ran ahead to look at a store window display. Vanessa caught Ethan's hand. "Your daughter just gave me relationship terms more comprehensive than most business contracts I've signed. She's protective and observant, and apparently running quality control on my personal life now. I like her rules, especially the one about seeing you be silly. I don't think I've ever seen you be silly." "That's because I'm professionally competent at all times." See, that's exactly what Sophie was talking about. You need to remember how to have fun. Vanessa squeezed his hand. "We're going to work on that together. You, me, and your terrifyingly perceptive 6-year-old. Sophie came running back, grabbed both their hands, and swung between them like they were playground equipment. "Can we do this every week? Pizza, and then ice cream, and all 3 of us together?" "Yeah, sweetheart," Ethan said, looking at Vanessa over Sophie's head. "I think we can do that." "Good." Sophie grinned up at them both. "Because you're my family now. Both of you. And family does things together. That's the rule." Family, Ethan thought. When had that stopped being just him and Sophie? When had it expanded to include Mrs. Chen and Richard and now Vanessa? Maybe family was what Sophie said it was, people who showed up, who noticed, who cared about the details. Blood didn't define it. Commitment did. Showing up consistently, being present for complications, choosing to stay even when leaving would be simpler. Walking through Chicago's March evening with his daughter's hand in one of his and Vanessa's in the other, Ethan thought about the phone call from Richard that had started everything. The revelation about his mother, the understanding that he'd inherited more than just linguistic talent. He'd inherited the capacity to build connections across gaps that seemed impossible to bridge. His mother had sacrificed her dreams to raise him. He'd sacrificed visibility to raise Sophie. And now, finally, he was learning that sacrifice didn't have to mean erasure. That being a father didn't mean stopping being himself. That letting someone in wasn't the same as losing the safety he'd built. Maybe complicated wasn't impossible after all. Maybe it was just another language he was learning to speak. The language of letting people matter, of building family from choice instead of obligation, of trusting that permanence could exist without guarantees. Sophie was singing something tuneless and joyful, swinging between them with complete faith that they'd hold on. And watching Vanessa smile at his daughter's terrible singing, Ethan realized something profound. For the first time in 7 years, he wasn't just surviving. He was actually living, building something real with people who saw him completely, flaws and fears and fierce devotion to his daughter, and chose to stay anyway. That was worth every complication, every risk, every moment of terrifying uncertainty. That was worth everything. Summer arrived in Chicago with the kind of heat that made the city feel both alive and exhausted simultaneously. Ethan's training program launched in June, 6 months after Tokyo, and watching the first cohort of interpreters struggle through the cultural competency modules he'd designed felt like watching people learn to walk in a language they thought they already spoke. "They're not getting it," he said to Richard during one of their weekly video calls. The Institute had become a regular part of his life now. Weekend modules, video consultations. the slow work of formalizing instinct into teachable theory. They can translate the words perfectly, but they're missing everything underneath. That's because you're teaching them to see gaps they've been trained to ignore their entire careers, Richard said. Give them time. Your mother struggled with this too, initially. She wrote in her notes that the hardest part wasn't learning new patterns. It was unlearning the assumption that translation was just word substitution. Ethan pulled up his mother's papers. He kept them in his office now, physical reminder of where this gift had started. Her handwriting still caught him off guard sometimes, familiar in ways he couldn't quite articulate. How long did it take her to figure it out? 3 months of frustration followed by one conversation that changed everything. Richard smiled at the memory. She was working with a Japanese diplomat, getting every word right, but completely missing the relational dynamics. Then she realized she was translating for her own understanding, not for connection between the people in the room. Once she understood that, everything shifted. What made her realize it? Failure. She completely botched a negotiation by being technically perfect and culturally oblivious. Spent a week convinced she should quit. Then came back and asked me to teach her how to hear what people weren't saying. Richard paused. Sound familiar? It did. Ethan thought about his early days at Whitmore, the Portuguese negotiation where he'd stumbled into cultural adaptation by accident, not design. About learning through mistakes rather than textbooks. So I should let them fail. You should let them struggle. Failure teaches what success never can. That precision without understanding is just noise. That evening, Ethan came home to find Vanessa and Sophie on the living room floor, surrounded by craft supplies and what appeared to be the remains of a school project that had gone catastrophically wrong. What happened here? He asked. Art, Sophie said dramatically. Terrible, terrible art. Vanessa tried to help, but she's really bad at glitter. I'm excellent at quarterly projections, Vanessa protested. Glitter operates on completely different physics. It's sparkly paper, not physics. Tell that to my suit jacket. Vanessa gestured at the blazer she'd draped over a chair. Expensive fabric now dotted with what looked like a glitter bomb had detonated nearby. Ethan laughed. Actually laughed. At the sight of Billionaire CEO Vanessa Whitmore, covered in craft supplies and defending her competence against a 6-year-old's artistic standards. You're both disasters, he said fondly. We're creative disasters, Sophie corrected. There's a difference. They'd fallen into this rhythm over the past months. Vanessa showing up 3 or 4 evenings a week, helping with homework or cooking dinner, or just existing in their space like she'd always belonged there. Mrs. Chen approved, which Sophie considered the ultimate endorsement. Even the school pickup line had adjusted to occasionally seeing Vanessa's town car instead of Ethan's aging sedan. How was the training cohort? Vanessa asked later, after Sophie was in bed and they'd cleaned up the glitter catastrophe. Struggling. They want formulas and rules. I'm trying to teach them to see relationships. So, basically, you're teaching them to be you, San. I'm teaching them to do what my mother understood instinctively. That language is about connection, not conversion. Ethan pulled Vanessa against him on the couch, still novel, this casual intimacy, but getting more comfortable. Richard says I should let them fail more. That struggle teaches better than success. Richard's right. You learned languages by making mistakes for years. Can't expect them to skip that part just because you're teaching them. When did you get so wise about pedagogy? When I started dating a man who thinks teaching cultural empathy to corporate interpreters is a reasonable use of his time. She kissed him lightly. I'm learning by proximity. Ethan's phone buzzed. An email from Tanaka-san with the subject line, Opportunity. He opened it, read quickly, felt his chest tighten. What's wrong? Vanessa asked, reading his expression. Tanaka-san wants me to come to Tokyo. Not for business, for a language symposium his company is sponsoring. He wants me to present on cross-cultural business communication in front of about 200 international business leaders. That's incredible. That's terrifying. I'm not an academic. I'm barely qualified to teach Whitmore's interpreters, let alone present to actual experts. Ethan. Vanessa turned to face him fully. You rebuilt a $42 million partnership by understanding what actual experts missed. You created a training program from scratch that's already changing how our interpreters approach their work. You're teaching people to see what they've been ignoring. That's exactly what makes you qualified. What if I'm just good at faking it? What if I get to Tokyo and everyone realizes I'm just a waiter who learned some languages? Then you'll be a waiter who learned languages standing in front of 200 people proving that expertise doesn't require traditional credentials. Vanessa's voice went firm, her CEO voice that meant she was done accepting excuses. You've spent 7 years believing you're not enough. When are you going to start believing you actually are? The question sat heavy between them. When would he start believing? When would the internal narrative shift from imposter to actual professional? When would he look at his achievements and see competence instead of luck? I don't know, he admitted. Probably never completely, but maybe I can fake believing until it becomes real. That's all confidence is anyway, faking it until you've done it enough times that it stops feeling fake. He agreed to the Tokyo Symposium, spent the next month preparing a presentation that felt simultaneously too personal and not academic enough. Richard helped, providing theoretical frameworks that gave structure to Ethan's instinctive approaches. The training cohort became test audiences, offering feedback that ranged from "this is revolutionary" to "this feels more like therapy than language instruction." Both were probably accurate. August brought Sophie's 7th birthday, which she insisted on celebrating with a pool party despite their apartment complex's pool being roughly the size of a large bathtub. Vanessa showed up with an inflatable unicorn float that barely fit through the gate and enough pool toys to supply a small water park. "You're spoiling her, sir," Ethan said, watching Sophie orchestrate pool games with the intensity of a military general. "I'm celebrating her. There's a difference." Vanessa adjusted her sunglasses. She'd bought sensible pool-appropriate clothing, which somehow made her look even more out of place among the regular apartment complex families. Besides, she's a good kid. Good kids deserve good birthdays. Mrs. Chen arrived with homemade spring rolls and banh mi, set up a full Vietnamese feast on the pool deck, and spent the afternoon teaching Sophie's friends basic Vietnamese phrases that they immediately mispronounced with enthusiastic confidence. "Your life is very full now," Miss Chen observed to Ethan as they watched Sophie show off her underwater swimming to Vanessa. "Last year, just you and Sophie and small birthday cake. This year, community, family, growth." Is that your way of saying I'm doing okay? That's my way of saying you stopped hiding. Good for you. Good for Sophie. She needs to see her father being whole person, not just careful parent. Whole person. The phrase stuck with Ethan through the rest of the party, through cleanup, through Sophie's bedtime routine, where she recounted every detail of her perfect day. "Best birthday ever," she announced definitively. "Because all my people were there, you and Vanessa and Mrs. Chen and my school friends. That's what matters. All your people in one place." After she fell asleep, Ethan found Vanessa cleaning up the kitchen despite his protests that she didn't need to. "Mrs. Chen said something today," he said, drying dishes while she washed, "about me being a whole person instead of just a careful parent. Made me realize I've spent 7 years splitting myself into categories. Parent Ethan, professional Ethan, never just Ethan. And now? Now, I don't know where the boundaries are anymore. Sophie comes to work events. You're here for birthdays. My personal life and professional life are bleeding together in ways that should probably concern me, but mostly just feel right." "Mom, my system." Vanessa dried her hands, turned to face him. "Want to know something? I hated boundaries. I built my entire life around keeping work separate from personal, keeping people at professional distances, maintaining control through compartmentalization. Then you showed up and destroyed every boundary I'd carefully constructed, and I kept waiting to hate it, to feel exposed or vulnerable or out of control. And I feel more in control than I have in years, because I'm not spending energy maintaining false separations anymore. I'm just existing, working and caring about people and letting those things overlap naturally instead of fighting it." She smiled. "Turns out boundaries weren't protecting me. They were just keeping me lonely." The Tokyo Symposium was scheduled for early September. Ethan flew out a week early at Tanaka-san's invitation, bringing Sophie because she'd negotiated her inclusion with the iron will of someone who refused to miss Japan again. Vanessa came too, ostensibly for business meetings, but mostly because none of them wanted to be separated for 2 weeks. They were past pretending their relationship was separable from their professional lives. HR had made peace with it, the company had adjusted, and honestly, the arrangement worked better with transparency than it ever had with false boundaries. Tanaka-san met them at the airport personally, greeted Sophie with the kind of grandfatherly warmth that immediately made her comfortable, and spent the car ride into Tokyo asking her about marine biology with genuine interest. "The Okinawa Aquarium sent materials," Sophie told him seriously. "I'm learning about reef ecosystems and deep-sea adaptation. Did you know some fish can create their own light? It's called bioluminescence, and it's basically magic, except it's science." "I did know that," Tanaka-san said, "but I've never heard it explained as magic science before. That's much better." He'd arranged for them to stay at a traditional ryokan in a quiet neighborhood, tatami mats, sliding screens, a garden that felt like stepping into a painting. Sophie was enchanted. Vanessa looked slightly terrified of breaking something priceless. Ethan felt the weight of being visible in ways he'd spent years avoiding. "This is too much," he said to Tanaka-san. "The accommodations, the symposium invitation, everything. You don't have to—" "I am not doing this because I have to," Tanaka-san interrupted gently. "I'm doing this because you understood something important, that business relationships are built on seeing each other as whole people, not just professional roles. You brought your daughter to our conversation. You spoke about family when others would have spoken only about contracts. That honesty built trust worth more than any negotiation tactic. I didn't have a strategy. I just answered your questions." "Exactly. You treated me like a person instead of an obstacle to overcome. That is rare. That is worth celebrating." Tanaka-san smiled. "The symposium presentation is not a favor, Ethan-san. It is an opportunity for others to learn what you already know. That connection matters more than perfection. The symposium itself was held in a modern conference center that probably cost more than Ethan's childhood home. 200 business leaders from across Asia and Europe, all carrying the particular confidence of people who'd succeeded in traditional ways through traditional paths. Ethan was scheduled to present on the second day, which gave him 24 hours to panic about whether his entire presentation was garbage. "You're catastrophizing," Vanessa said the night before, finding him pacing their room at midnight while Sophie slept in the adjacent space. "I'm realistically assessing the probability that I'm about to humiliate myself in front of 200 experts. You're working yourself into anxiety that serves no purpose." She pulled him down to sit beside her. "Want to know what I see when I look at your presentation? Mediocre PowerPoint design and theories I mostly stole from my mother's papers? I see someone who spent his entire life learning to see gaps that others ignore. Someone who rebuilt a failed partnership by caring about Tanaka-san's son. Someone who teaches interpreters that their job is connection, not just translation. That's not mediocre, Ethan. That's revolutionary in a field that's forgotten why it exists. What if they don't see it that way?" "Basi, okay, then they're not ready to hear it yet. But you'll have said it anyway. You'll have stood up and argued that language is fundamentally about human connection, not just word conversion. That matters whether they understand it immediately or not." The next morning, Ethan stood backstage listening to his introduction. Tanaka-san explaining how an American interpreter had rebuilt their partnership by understanding that business was relationship before transaction. The applause was polite, professional, completely neutral. He walked out to the podium, looked at 200 faces waiting to judge whether he deserved to be there, and thought about his mother. About Grace Cole at 22, brilliant and ambitious, studying in this same country before pregnancy and poverty forced her to give it all up. About the papers she'd left behind, the theories she'd never gotten to present, the legacy she'd passed to him without explanation or expectation. "My mother was a linguist," he began, abandoning his planned opening. "She studied at the Holloway Institute in Boston 35 years ago, was apparently brilliant, and gave it all up when she got pregnant with me. I didn't know any of this until 8 months ago. She never told me. She just taught me that languages were important, encouraged my learning, and died when I was 19 without ever explaining that she'd sacrificed her dreams so I could exist. The room had gone very quiet. This wasn't the academic presentation they'd expected. I spent years wondering why I was good at languages. Turns out it was genetic, inherited talent from a woman who understood something fundamental that I'm still learning. That language isn't about words. It's about proving we're not alone in our own heads. It's about building bridges across gaps that seem impossible to cross. It's about seeing this person behind the grammar and choosing to meet them where they are, instead of demanding they come to you. He talked for 40 minutes about his mother's theories, about learning Japanese from YouTube and patient strangers, about raising a daughter while teaching himself that invisibility wasn't the same as safety, about Tanaka-san and tea ceremonies and the conversation about children that had mattered more than any contract term, about training interpreters to see relationships instead of just translating words. We've professionalized language, he said in closing, made it technical and precise and removed from the actual human connection it's meant to facilitate. My mother understood that was wrong. I'm still learning it. But the core truth is simple. Every time we translate, we're not converting words. We're building bridges between people who think they can't understand each other. That's not a technical skill. That's fundamentally an act of hope. Hope that connection is possible. Hope that understanding can be built. Hope that we're not as isolated as our different languages suggest. The applause started slowly, then built. Not polite anymore, actually engaged. The Q&A session ran an hour over schedule, people asking about his training methods, his mother's research, how to teach cultural sensitivity to interpreters who'd been doing purely technical work for decades. Ethan answered as honestly as he could, admitting gaps in his knowledge, acknowledging that he was still figuring most of this out himself. Afterward, at least 20 people approached him for contact information, wanted to discuss collaboration, invited him to present at their own institutions. Tanaka-san stood nearby, smiling with grandfatherly satisfaction. "You honored your mother well today," he said quietly when the crowd finally dispersed. "She would be proud of how you've taken her understanding and made it your own." That evening, Ethan took Sophie and Vanessa to a neighborhood restaurant. Nothing fancy, just good ramen and the kind of casual atmosphere where Sophie could slurp noodles without judgment. Sophie was working on a postcard to Mrs. Chen, carefully drawing fish and towers and chopsticks with intense concentration. "Dad gave a speech today," she announced to their server in English, then attempted Japanese that was grammatically creative but enthusiastically delivered. About Grandma Grace and languages and building bridges, everyone clapped a lot. It was very important. The server smiled, complimented Sophie's Japanese attempt, and brought extra gyoza for the important speaker's family. "You told her I was important," Ethan said after the server left. "You are important." Everyone clapped. "That means you did good." Sophie returned to her postcard. "Mrs. Chen will want to know all the details. I'm drawing pictures because words aren't enough." Words aren't enough. From a 6-year-old who just watched her father argue that language was fundamentally about human connection. The irony wasn't lost on Ethan. "What did you think?" he asked Vanessa quietly while Sophie drew. Honest assessment. "I think you did something I've never seen at a business symposium. You were vulnerable. You talked about your mother and failure and learning through struggle. Most presenters at that level perform competence. You performed honesty. It was remarkable." Remarkably unprofessional? Remarkably human, which is apparently what people need to hear but rarely get permission to acknowledge. Vanessa took his hand across the table. "You changed how those people think about their work. That's not a small thing, Ethan." They spent the rest of the week in Japan like actual tourists, temples and gardens, teaching Sophie basic Japanese phrases that she immediately weaponized in gift shops, eating street food and letting Sophie try everything despite knowing they'd pay for it later with a stomachache. Vanessa was different here, away from Chicago and corporate expectations, lighter, more willing to laugh at herself when she mispronounced words or got hopelessly lost trying to navigate subway systems. On their last evening, they went to the Sumida Aquarium at Sophie's insistence. She dragged them through exhibits with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been personally promised marine biology would be her life's work. narrating facts both real and invented with equal confidence. At the jellyfish exhibit, ethereal creatures floating in illuminated tanks, Sophie pressed her face against the glass. "They're magic science," she whispered. "Like the bioluminescence fish, but even more impossible. Nothing's impossible, Vanessa said, crouching beside her. Just not understood yet. Sophie turned, considered Vanessa seriously. "Are you going to marry my dad?" Ethan choked on air. Vanessa's composure cracked visibly. "That's a very direct question," Vanessa managed. "You didn't say no," Sophie observed. "That means you're thinking about it, Mrs. Chen says when adults don't say no immediately, they're thinking yes but scared to admit it. Hush. Mrs. Chen is terrifyingly accurate about adult psychology, Ethan said, recovering enough to speak. "So are you?" Sophie pressed. "Because I think you should. You make Dad smile the different way, and he makes you laugh like you're actually happy instead of pretending. And you're good at being around even when things are hard. That's important." Vanessa looked at Ethan over Sophie's head. A question maybe, or permission to answer honestly. "I think about it," Vanessa said carefully, "about being part of your family officially. But that's a big decision that involves a lot of people, including you. So if we ever get to that point, you'd be part of the decision too. Because you're right, family is people who show up, and you're already family." "Batterimits," Sophie nodded, satisfied. "Okay, but when you decide, I want to help pick the dress. And there has to be cake, really good cake, not the fancy kind that looks pretty, but tastes like disappointment." "Deal," Vanessa said, voice slightly unsteady. Later, after Sophie was asleep in their ryokan room, Ethan and Vanessa sat in the garden under stars that looked different in Japan somehow. "She's not wrong," Vanessa said quietly. "I do think about it. About marriage and permanence and officially being part of this family you're building. But I'm terrified. Not of you or Sophie. Of failing at something that matters this much. I've spent 6 years successfully running a company. But relationships? I'm learning as I go. What if I'm terrible at being a wife? At being a parental figure to Sophie? At maintaining this when we're back in Chicago and real life gets complicated? Then you'll be terrible at it while trying your best. Same as I am with parenting." Ethan took her hand. "Vanessa, you've been showing up consistently for 8 months, coming to birthday parties, helping with homework, learning about marine biology because it matters to Sophie. That's not failing. That's succeeding in ways that don't fit neat categories. When did you get so confident about relationships?" "About 30 seconds ago when I realized we're both making this up as we go, and that's actually okay. We don't need perfect. We need present." He smiled. "Sophie taught me that. She's been teaching me a lot of things lately. Your daughter is wise beyond her years. She gets it from my mother, apparently. Gift passed down through generations. Seeing what matters underneath what's visible." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the garden shadows shift in the wind. Somewhere in Tokyo, 200 business leaders were probably still discussing Ethan's presentation, debating whether vulnerability belonged in professional contexts. Here, none of that mattered. Here it was just two people learning to build something real in the spaces between career and family, professional and personal, fear and possibility. Flying back to Chicago 2 days later, Sophie asleep between them on the plane, Ethan thought about how different this trip had been from his first Tokyo journey 8 months ago. Then he'd been terrified, alone, trying to fix a problem through pure competence. Now he was returning with his daughter and girlfriend, having presented at a symposium about his dead mother's theories, building a life that didn't fit neat categories but worked anyway. "What are you thinking?" Vanessa asked, noticing his expression. "That I've spent my entire life trying to be what other people needed. Good son to my mother. Competent father to Sophie. Invisible waiter, professional interpreter. And somehow in the process of trying to be all those things, I forgot to just be myself. And now I think maybe all those versions were just me learning how. Learning to see gaps and build bridges, and understand that connection matters more than perfection. My mother gave me the gift. Sophie reminded me it existed. You gave me space to actually use it. Very philosophical for airplane musings. Tokyo does that to me, apparently. He squeezed her hand. Thank you for coming, for being here, for letting me figure out complicated without requiring it to become simple. Thank you for teaching me that complicated can be good, that boundaries don't actually protect you from pain, they just keep you lonely. Vanessa smiled. I'm learning a lot from you, Ethan Cole, about how to be present, how to show up consistently, how to let people matter. Mrs. Chen would say we're learning from each other. That's what good relationships do. Mrs. Chen is always right. It's unnerving. When they landed in Chicago, Mrs. Chen was waiting at arrivals with a welcome home sign Sophie had apparently requested via text, and enough enthusiasm to make several nearby travelers smile at the reunion. You're back, Mrs. Chen announced unnecessarily. Good. I have many questions about Japan and whether you brought me omiyage. Ethan handed her a carefully wrapped package, Japanese tea and sweets he'd selected with her specific tastes in mind. She opened it, nodded approvingly. Good sun figure, you remembered. Now tell me about speech and symposium and whether everyone understood how smart you are. Over the next weeks, life settled into a rhythm that felt both new and sustainable. Ethan's training cohort graduated their first module, several of them showing genuine understanding of cultural nuance that hadn't existed when they started. The Tokyo presentation led to 3 more speaking invitations, opportunities to spread his mother's theories about language and connection to audiences who were starting to listen. Vanessa's company continued growing, but she'd learned to delegate, to trust that the business could function without her constant oversight. She spent more evenings at Ethan's apartment, still technically separate residences for practical reasons, but the boundaries were increasingly blurred. Sophie thrived, her second-grade teacher commenting that she had unusual emotional intelligence for a 7-year-old, and an impressive vocabulary in multiple languages despite formal instruction in exactly 0 of them. She's absorbing everything, the teacher said during parent conferences. Languages, cultural concepts, interpersonal dynamics. It's remarkable. Whatever you're doing at home, keep doing it. Bipam. What they were doing at home was existing honestly, speaking multiple languages at dinner, discussing complicated topics without dumbing them down, letting Sophie see adults navigate relationships and work and failure without pretending perfection was achievable or even desirable. October brought an email from Richard with "Your mother" in the subject line. Ethan opened it with the familiar mix of curiosity and grief that accompanied any mention of Grace Cole. Inside, Richard had written, I was cleaning out old files and found this. Your mother wrote it the week before she left the Institute. I think she'd want you to have it. Attached was a scanned essay, his mother's handwriting, titled On Translation and Parenthood. Ethan read it sitting at his desk while the office buzzed around him, feeling like his mother was speaking directly across 35 years. She'd written about choosing to leave the Institute, about knowing she was giving up her dreams but believing her child mattered more than professional achievement. But the final paragraph hit him like a physical blow. Perhaps the greatest translation I'll ever accomplish isn't converting languages, but raising a child who understands that connection matters more than success. That seeing people fully, their hopes and fears and complicated humanity, is worth more than any professional accomplishment. If I can teach my child to build bridges between people who think they can't understand each other, then I will have translated my dreams into something better than I could have achieved alone. Not failed, just transformed. Ethan read it 3 times, tears blurring the words. His mother hadn't seen her choice as sacrifice. She'd seen it as transformation, converting her dreams into something that could outlive her limitations, building a legacy through him instead of despite him. He forwarded the essay to Vanessa, to Richard, to his training cohort with a note. This is what we're actually doing. Not just translating words, transforming understanding into connection that outlives individual conversations. That evening, he showed Sophie the essay, explaining who her grandmother had been, what she'd chosen, why it mattered. So Grandma Grace gave up being famous so you could exist? Sophie asked seriously. Yeah, pretty much. That's the best trade ever, because you're really important, and now I exist too because you exist. So Grandma Grace basically made both of us possible. Sophie studied the essay. I wish I could tell her thank you. Me too, sweetheart. Can I keep this to remember her? Ethan made a copy, gave Sophie the original. She tucked it carefully into her special box, the one where she kept important things like Vanessa's aquarium penguin and drawings of their family, and now her grandmother's words about transformation. November arrived cold and clear, winter settling over Chicago with the particular bite that reminded everyone why people moved to warmer climates. Ethan's first major presentation of his training methodology was scheduled for a linguistics conference in Boston. Richard had arranged it, pulling strings to get an independent consultant on a program normally reserved for tenured academics. "You nervous?" Vanessa asked the morning he was set to fly out. "Terrified. Also excited. Also convinced I'm going to embarrass myself in front of people who actually know what they're doing. So, typical you facing anything important. Accurate assessment." She kissed him, wished him luck, promised to keep Sophie entertained while he was gone. Sophie had gotten philosophical about his travel lately, understood that important work sometimes required temporary separation. The Boston presentation went better than expected. Ethan talked about his training program, about teaching interpreters to see relationships instead of just converting words, about his mother's theories finally finding application 35 years after she'd written them. The Q&A session ran long, several professors expressing interest in collaborating, incorporating his methods into their own linguistics programs. Richard was in the audience, beaming with grandfatherly pride. "She'd be so proud," he said afterward. Grace would have loved seeing her theories taught to new generations. "Thank you for finishing what she started." "I'm not finishing it," Ethan corrected gently. "I'm transforming it, converting her understanding into something that works for now. That's different." "You're right. That's better." Richard smiled. "You've learned her most important lesson. That translation isn't about preservation. It's about transformation that maintains core meaning while adapting to new contexts. Flying back to Chicago that evening, Ethan thought about transformation, about how his mother had transformed her dreams into his capabilities, how he'd transformed survival into actual competence, how Sophie was transforming all of it into her own understanding of what connection meant. Nothing ended. Everything just changed form, passed down, became something new while honoring what came before. December brought the holidays and Sophie's increasingly elaborate plans for how they should celebrate as a family. Her word, emphasized repeatedly to ensure everyone understood the assignment. "We need traditions," she announced during dinner one evening. "Real family traditions, not just ice cream on Saturdays. Big traditions that we do every year forever." "What kind of traditions?" Vanessa asked. "I'm still deciding, but they need to involve everyone. You, Dad, me, Mrs. Chen, maybe Richard if he wants to visit. And they have to be special enough that when I'm old like 30, I'll remember them and smile." "30 is old?" Ethan asked. "Ancient, practically dead." Sophie grinned at his expression. "I'm kidding. 30 is when you're finally smart enough to know things, but still young enough to do things. Like you and Vanessa." "I'm actually 33, Ethan said. "Even better. You've had extra time to get smart." They decided on traditions together. Christmas morning breakfast that everyone contributed to, New Year's Day where they each shared one thing they wanted to learn in the coming year, Sophie's birthday weekend trips to somewhere she'd never been. Small things that marked time, built memory, created structure that felt chosen rather than inherited. On Christmas Eve, Vanessa showed up at their apartment with a box wrapped in plain paper, Sophie's name on the tag. "This is from my mother," she said, which surprised everyone. Vanessa rarely mentioned her mother, who'd apparently retreated from public life after her husband died, and Vanessa took over the company. "I told her about you, about how you're basically the wisest 7-year-old on the planet. She wanted you to have this." Sophie opened it carefully. Inside, a leather journal with blank pages and a note in elegant handwriting. "For recording important observations about the world. Your mother tells me you notice everything. That's a gift. Use it wisely. Margaret Whitmore." Sophie looked at Vanessa with something like awe. "Your mom knows about me? I talk about you all the time, about your marine biology obsession and your unfiltered observations, and how you're basically running quality control on your dad's life. She thinks you sound remarkable. Can I meet her? Maybe, if you want. She's not great with people, but she's good with direct questions and unusual kids. You'd probably get along. I have so many questions about being a CEO and running companies and whether it's hard being in charge of everything. She'll have answers, probably more honest ones than I'd give. Vanessa smiled. Consider it a future adventure. That night, after Sophie was asleep clutching her new journal and the stuffed penguin from Boston and every other treasured object she'd accumulated, Ethan and Vanessa sat in the living room with the lights down and the Christmas tree providing the only illumination. Your mother sent Sophie a gift, Ethan said. That's significant. My mother never sends gifts. Said Sophie must be important if I talk about her that much. Which is true. Sophie's become important to me in ways I didn't expect when we started dating. She comes with the package. Any relationship with me includes a 7-year-old with extensive opinions. I know, I signed up for exactly that package. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. Ethan, I've been thinking about what Sophie asked in Tokyo. About marriage and permanence and becoming official family instead of just acting like it. Ethan's heart kicked against his ribs. And I think she was right. We're already functioning like a family. We're just missing the formal declaration. So I'm asking, not proposing, because I want you to propose when you're ready, but I'm asking if you'd consider it. Consider marrying me, making this permanent, building something official with Sophie at the center because she's the wisest person in this relationship and deserves parents who are honest about their commitment. That was the least romantic marriage proposal I've ever heard. I said I wasn't proposing. I'm negotiating terms. But Vanessa smiled when she said it. Okay, terms. I'd like to propose properly, with Sophie's input because she'll be offended if we make major decisions without her consultation. Sometime in the next 6 months. Is that acceptable? That's acceptable. But Ethan, I'm saying yes now. Whatever you eventually ask, whenever you ask it, my answer is yes, because you've taught me what partnership actually means. That it's showing up consistently, seeing each other fully, choosing complicated over easy because complicated with you is better than simple with anyone else. They sat together in the Christmas tree light, making plans in comfortable silence. Ethan thought about his mother's essay, about transformation versus sacrifice, about how love sometimes meant converting dreams into different forms that honored the original intention while building something new. His mother had transformed her linguistics dreams into raising him. He'd transformed survival into competence, invisibility into actual presence. Sophie was transforming all of it into her own understanding of how relationships worked. And now Vanessa, careful, controlled Vanessa who'd built walls against vulnerability, was choosing to build something permanent with him. Transforming corporate boundaries into actual partnership. Nothing ended. Everything just changed form, became something new while carrying forward the important parts. January arrived with the kind of cold that made Chicago feel actively hostile to human existence. Ethan proposed on a Saturday afternoon at their ice cream place, Sophie's choice of venue because important things should happen, in happy places, with a ring he'd chosen with Sophie's extensive input and a speech he'd written and rewritten a dozen times. You taught me that hiding isn't the same as safety, he said, while Sophie recorded video on Vanessa's phone with directorial intensity. That being seen completely, flaws and fierce devotion to a 7-year-old who runs my life, is better than being invisible. You chose complicated over easy. You chose us. So I'm asking, will you keep choosing us? Officially, permanently, with all the complications and beautiful mess that comes with marrying a man who speaks 7 languages and has a daughter who will absolutely have opinions about every major life decision. Yes, Vanessa said, crying and laughing simultaneously. Obviously, yes. Did you seriously think I'd say anything else? Sophie cheered. The ice cream place staff applauded. Bud and Mrs. Chen, who'd been strategically positioned at a nearby table, announced to everyone present that she'd called this development 8 months ago and was accepting apologies for those who'd doubted her. They set the wedding for June, small ceremony with the people who mattered. Sophie was flower girl by unanimous decree. Mrs. Chen insisted on handling the Vietnamese food components of the reception, and Richard agreed to officiate because he'd connected Ethan to his mother's legacy, and this felt like closing a circle that had started decades before Ethan was born. The months between proposal and wedding were chaotic in the best way. Planning while working, building while learning, maintaining the regular rhythm of their lives while preparing for official transformation. Ethan's training program expanded. Vanessa's company continued growing. Sophie started third grade with the confidence of someone who understood her family was solid, regardless of external circumstances. The wedding itself was exactly what Sophie had demanded. Good cake, everyone she loved present, enough joy that the formality felt genuine rather than performative. Standing at the altar, watching Vanessa walk toward him, Ethan thought about all the moments that had led here. His mother's sacrifice, Amanda's abandonment, 7 years of invisibility, speaking Mandarin to a billionaire in a restaurant. Every single choice and chance and transformation that had built this particular moment. Richard's ceremony was brief, focusing on translation as metaphor for marriage. Two people learning to understand each other's languages, building bridges across differences, choosing connection over perfect comprehension. You'll misunderstand each other, Richard said, looking at them both. You'll have moments where communication fails, and you'll wonder if you're speaking different languages entirely. But that's when you remember, translation isn't about perfection, it's about trying. It's about believing connection is possible even when it's difficult. It's about choosing to keep building bridges even when the gaps seem impossible to cross. They exchanged vows they'd written together. Promises about showing up consistently and choosing complicated and teaching each other languages, literal and metaphorical, for as long as they both lived. Sophie presented the rings with appropriate ceremony, whispered, "Don't mess this up," loudly enough that the entire front row heard and laughed. At the reception, dancing with Vanessa while Sophie ran around with her school friends, and Mrs. Chen held court telling anyone who'd listen about how she'd known this would happen from the beginning. Ethan felt something settle in his chest. Not happiness exactly, though that was present. Something deeper. Something like finally believing he deserved to be visible, that his presence mattered, that being seen completely was better than any safety and visibility provided. "What are you thinking?" Vanessa asked, reading his expression. "That I spent 7 years believing survival was success. That being invisible kept us safe. That asking for help or letting people matter was weakness. And now? Now I think survival was just the foundation. This, us, Sophie, the family we're building, this is actually living. This is the thing my mother transformed her dreams to create. Not sacrifice. Investment in something that would outlast her limitations." "Your mother would be proud of you." "I think she already was. She just never got to tell me." He pulled Vanessa closer. "But I can tell Sophie. I can show her that being vulnerable with people you trust isn't weakness. That complicated relationships are worth more than simple ones. That languages, all languages, verbal and emotional, are about proving we're not alone in our own heads." Very philosophical for a wedding reception. "Your fault. You married a man who thinks about linguistics metaphors at inappropriate times. I knew what I was signing up for." They danced while Sophie orchestrated games with the other children, while Mrs. Chen shared stories with Richard about watching Ethan transform from invisible waiter to confident professional, while Vanessa's mother, who'd surprised everyone by actually attending, talked quietly with Tanaka-san about international business and their shared investment in building relationships that mattered beyond quarterly profits. Late in the evening, after cake and dancing and enough celebration that Sophie was running on pure adrenaline, Ethan found a quiet moment with his daughter. "You doing okay, sweetheart?" "This is the best day," Sophie said seriously. "Because everyone's here and everyone's happy and you and Vanessa are officially permanent now. That's important." "Why is that important to you?" "Because families should be official. They should make promises in front of people so everyone knows it's real. You and me were always real, but now Vanessa's officially part of it too. That's better." Ethan hugged her, this small human who'd taught him more about relationships than any formal education could provide. "You know what? You're absolutely right. Making it official makes it better. Thank you for insisting we do this properly." "What? You're welcome. I'm very wise." She grinned. "Mrs. Chen says I get it from Grandma Grace. She's probably right." Later, much later, after guests had left and Sophie had finally crashed from excitement exhaustion, Ethan and Vanessa sat in their hotel room. They were staying in the city overnight before flying to A. brief honeymoon Sophie had helped plan, and looked at their wedding rings with something like wonder. "We actually did it," Vanessa said. "Made it official." Having regrets already? Having the opposite of regrets. Having satisfaction that we chose each other publicly, that we built something real enough to declare permanent. She leaned against him. "Thank you for seeing me when I was trying to be invisible behind corporate armor, for teaching me that being human is better than being perfect, for loving me despite all my complicated edges. Thank you for seeing me when I was actually trying to be invisible, for giving me chances I didn't think I deserved, for loving Sophie like she's yours." He kissed her temple. "For transforming my careful survival into actual living." They sat together in comfortable silence, married now, officially permanent, building something that honored everyone who'd contributed to bringing them here. His mother's sacrifice, Sophie's wisdom, Richard's connection, Mrs. Chen's perception, Tanaka-san's trust. All of it woven together into this moment, this commitment, this choice to keep choosing each other despite all the complications that made simple impossible. Because simple had never been the goal. Connection was the goal. Understanding was the goal. Building bridges across gaps that seemed impossible to cross was the goal. And sitting here with his wife, still strange to think that, Ethan understood something his mother had written, but he'd only now internalized. That the greatest translation wasn't converting languages, but transforming dreams into forms that outlived individual limitations. That sacrifice and investment looked identical in the moment, but created completely different legacies. His mother had invested in him. He'd invested in Sophie. They were all investing in each other, building something that would outlast them individually, transforming personal dreams into collective reality. Outside their hotel window, Chicago's winter stretched cold and clear, the city lights reflecting off Lake Michigan like captured stars. Somewhere in that city, Sophie was asleep dreaming of marine biology and family traditions and the official permanence of promises made in front of people who mattered. Somewhere, Mrs. Chen was probably telling someone, anyone who'd listen, that she'd called this development months ago. Somewhere Richard was smiling, knowing that Grace Cole's legacy had found expression in her son's ability to build bridges between people who thought they couldn't understand each other. And here, in this hotel room, Ethan Cole, former waiter, self-taught linguist, single father, now husband, felt something he'd spent years convinced was impossible. He felt like he belonged exactly where he was. Not hiding, not surviving, not pretending, just existing fully, loved completely, building something real with people who chose to see him. That was the transformation his mother had invested in. Not sacrifice, not failure, just different dreams taking different forms, carrying forward the important parts, building bridges toward futures that honored the past without being limited by it. And that, Ethan thought, was the most successful translation of all, converting hope into reality. Transforming dreams into legacy, building connections that proved definitively and permanently that none of them were alone in their own heads. They were family, chosen, complicated, officially permanent family, and that was worth everything.